Reframe problems as opportunities. Reframing problems as opportunities is one of the most transformative mental shifts you can make, yet most people never master it. At its core, this technique is about taking what appears to be a setback, obstacle, or loss, and consciously choosing to view it as a hidden doorway to growth, learning, or advantage. It's not blind optimism or pretending everything is fine. It's the strategic act of altering your perception so that what once felt like a wall now looks like a stepping stone. Our brains are wired for survival, which means when faced with a problem, our instinct is to focus on danger, loss, or pain. This triggers stress, narrows our thinking, and often leads to inaction. But when you reframe a problem as an opportunity, you override this primal fear response and engage the creative, resourceful parts of your mind. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin asking, "What can I gain from this?" That one shift in language changes your emotional state, and your emotional state determines your actions. Imagine losing your job. Most will spiral into fear, shame, and self-doubt. But reframing sees it differently. This is a force opening, a chance to finally start the business you've been dreaming of, to pivot to a career that excites you, or to escape a toxic environment. Suddenly, the loss becomes the launch pad. Those who master reframing find power in places others see despair. They turn rejection into redirection, failure into fuel, and roadblocks into routes that others overlook. Every problem becomes a disguised invitation, and the world begins to feel less like a battlefield and more like a treasure map waiting to be explored. Visualize success in vivid detail. Visualizing success in vivid detail is not daydreaming. It is mental rehearsal that programs your mind and body to perform as if the outcome is inevitable. At its core, this technique involves creating a crystal clear, sensory-rich image of the moment you've achieved your goal, so real and immersive that your brain can't tell the difference between imagination and reality. When done correctly, visualization doesn't just inspire you, it changes your physiology, sharpens your focus, and hardwires the belief that success is possible. The human brain is a prediction machine, constantly shaping your actions based on the future it expects. When you mentally rehearse success, your mind begins to expect that outcome, and your body starts aligning itself to make it real. Olympic athletes have used this for decades, mentally running their race until the firing of muscles and timing of breaths become automatic. The same principle applies to public speaking, negotiating, performing, or even healing from illness. If your mind can experience it, your body begins to believe it. To make visualization powerful, you must see it as if it's happening now. Imagine the colors, the lighting, the smell of the room, the weight of the handshake, the sound of your name being called. Feel the emotions, pride, relief, gratitude, until they pulse through you like they already belong to you. This emotional charge is what tricks the brain into believing the vision. Most people focus on obstacles. Visualization shifts your focus to inevitability. When you've lived your victory 100 times in your mind, the real moment feels familiar, and confidence replaces fear. You stop chasing success like a stranger. You start stepping into it like an old friend. Ask, "What's the simplest next step?" Asking, "What's the simplest next step?" is a mental reset button that slices through overwhelm and paralysis like a blade. It's deceptively simple, yet profoundly powerful because it pulls you out of the tangled mess of everything you could do and forces you to focus on the one smallest, most achievable action you can do right now. This question works because the human brain is easily intimidated by complexity. When a task or goal feels too big, our survival wiring perceives it as a threat, triggering procrastination, doubt, and avoidance. By narrowing your attention to the simplest possible move, you bypass the fear center of your brain and re-engage momentum. The beauty is that simplicity doesn't mean insignificance. Even the tiniest action creates a ripple that makes the next step easier than the next until the impossible starts to look inevitable. Writing one sentence can lead to finishing a chapter. Sending one email can lead to landing a client. Doing 5 push-ups can lead to a fitness transformation. This question also destroys the toxic perfectionism that keeps so many stuck. You're no longer trying to design the perfect plan before acting. You're simply looking for the smallest thread to pull. And once you pull it, the knot starts to unravel. When life feels overwhelming, your mind often screams for an escape. But when you calmly ask, what's the simplest next step, you silence the noise and turn chaos into clarity. It's not about the grand leap. It's about the smallest move forward, the move that turns stuck energy into unstoppable momentum. Break tasks into micro steps. Breaking tasks into micro steps is the art of dismantling overwhelming goals into bite-sized actions so small they feel almost laughably easy to start. It's not just a productivity trick. It's a psychological lever that transforms dread into momentum. The human brain loves completion, and each small step you finish delivers a hit of dopamine, building a cycle of motivation that propels you forward. When a task feels huge, writing a book, launching a business, reorganizing your life, your mind sees it as a mountain, and fear sets in before you take the first step. But when you break that mountain into pebbles, the intimidation disappears. Write a chapter becomes write a single sentence. Get in shape becomes put on workout clothes. The barrier to entry is so low you can't justify avoiding it. The magic is in the chain reaction. That one sentence often turns into a paragraph. That 5-minute walk turns into a half-hour workout. That single phone call becomes a productive day. Each micro step builds momentum, and momentum builds confidence until the goal that once felt crushing is now something you're gliding toward almost effortlessly. This approach also protects you from the toxic loop of procrastination and guilt. Instead of berating yourself for not doing enough, you get small wins constantly, which shift your self-image from someone who struggles to someone who takes action. Over time, these micro steps become an unstoppable habit loop. Breaking tasks into micro steps isn't about doing less. It's about building the bridge to doing more by making the start so easy you can't talk yourself out of it. Once you start, finishing becomes inevitable. Use the 5-minute start trick. The 5-minute start trick is a psychological hack that dismantles procrastination by tricking your brain into beginning a task without the weight of full commitment. It works because the hardest part of any task is not the work itself. It's overcoming the resistance to starting. By telling yourself you only need to do it for 5 minutes, you remove the pressure, quiet the inner critic, and bypass the fear of the task size or complexity. Your brain hates uncertainty and loves closure. When you face a big project, your mind floods with what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. But the moment you begin, even in the smallest way, your brain shifts from avoidance to engagement. That 5 minutes is enough to dissolve the mental barrier between thinking about the work and actually doing it. The trick is that once you've started, momentum takes over. You might tell yourself you'll clean for just 5 minutes, but once you've put away the first few items, the urge to keep going kicks in. You may open a blank document to write one sentence, and 20 minutes later, you're still typing. The human mind resists starting far more than it resists continuing. This method also removes perfectionism's chokehold. By lowering the commitment to something almost too easy to fail, you free yourself from the expectation of brilliance or completion. You're simply showing up for 5 minutes, and showing up is where the magic begins. The 5-minute start is not about tricking yourself into doing less. It's about opening the door to doing far more than you imagined, simply by beginning before your excuses can catch up. Reverse engineer from the end goal. Reverse engineering from the end goal is the mental blueprinting process that transforms vague dreams into precise, actionable steps. It starts with crystal clarity. You imagine your destination in exact detail, the result achieved, the metrics met, the feeling of completion, and then you mentally trace the path backward until you're standing at the present moment. This flips the way most people approach goals, because instead of stumbling forward blindly, you're working from a finished map toward a known destination. The brain responds differently when it sees a defined finish line. Ambiguity breeds hesitation, but a vivid, tangible goal creates a magnetic pull. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What had to happen right before this success was possible?" That question unlocks the sequence of critical actions and decisions that lead there. If the goal is publishing a book, you reverse from holding the printed copy to sending the manuscript, to editing drafts, to outlining chapters, all the way back to writing the first sentence. This technique also exposes bottlenecks before you hit them. When you work backward, you see where resources, skills, or relationships will be needed, allowing you to prepare in advance rather than scramble under pressure. It turns overwhelm into structure, uncertainty into inevitability. People who master reverse engineering operate like chess players, making moves with the end game already secured in their mind. They're not guessing at the path, they're retracing it. Every choice, every step, every pivot is guided by a future they've already visited in their imagination, which makes arriving there feel less like luck and more like following directions they wrote themselves. Ask better questions, get better answers. Asking better questions is a mental skill that can change the entire trajectory of your decisions, relationships, and opportunities. The quality of your life is directly tied to the quality of the questions you ask, because questions are the compass that guide your thinking. When you ask shallow, vague, or reactive questions, your brain delivers equally shallow answers. But when you ask precise, challenging, and empowering questions, you force your mind to search for deeper truths, creative solutions, and new possibilities. Most people ask questions that keep them stuck. Why is this happening to me? What if I fail? Why am I not good enough? These are dead-end questions that lock you into a victim's mindset. But if you shift to, what can I learn from this? How can I make this work? What am I not seeing yet? Suddenly, your brain opens doors instead of building walls. The brain is a problem-solving machine, and the questions you feed it are the instructions it follows. Ask, how can I triple my income in the next year without sacrificing my health? And your subconscious will quietly start piecing together answers, spotting opportunities you would have otherwise ignored. This is why high performers, leaders, and innovators obsess over the questions they ask, because they know their thinking is shaped by them. Better questions pull your attention to solutions instead of problems, possibilities instead of limitations. They spark curiosity, invite growth, and force you to think bigger than your fears. Change your questions, and you don't just change your answers, you change what's possible for your entire life. Rehearse difficult conversations mentally. Rehearsing difficult conversations mentally is the secret weapon for walking into high-stakes moments with clarity, control, and confidence. At its core, it's the practice of running the entire interaction through your mind before it happens, imagining the words you'll say, the tone you'll use, and even the emotional energy you'll project, so that when the real moment arrives, you feel like you've already lived it. This mental preparation transforms fear into readiness. Difficult conversations trigger the body's stress response. Your heart races, your voice tightens, and your brain floods with adrenaline, making it harder to think clearly in the moment. By rehearsing in advance, you're conditioning your mind and nervous system to respond with intention instead of panic. You're teaching yourself to stay composed when it matters most. The process isn't just about practicing your own words, it's about anticipating theirs. You imagine the possible reactions: anger, defensiveness, sadness, or silence. You mentally prepare your responses for each, so you're never blindsided. You picture your body language, steady eye contact, open posture, calm breathing, because how you carry yourself often speaks louder than what you say. This technique works because the brain's mirror of reality is astonishingly convincing. Athletes use mental rehearsal to sharpen performance, and negotiators use it to stay cool under pressure. The more vividly you visualize, the more natural it feels in the real moment. When you step into a difficult conversation you've already played out in your head, you radiate a calm, grounded presence. Instead of fumbling for words, you speak with purpose. Instead of reacting emotionally, you respond strategically. And the other person feels it. You're unshakable because you've already been here before. Use negative visualization to reduce fear. Negative visualization is a counterintuitive mental technique that strips fear of its power by forcing you to face it head on. Instead of avoiding thoughts of failure or loss, you deliberately imagine the worst-case scenario in vivid detail, not to scare yourself, but to disarm it. This approach, rooted in Stoic philosophy, trains your mind to accept that even if the worst happens, you will survive, adapt, and move forward. Fear thrives in the unknown. When you leave your fears undefined, your brain fills the void with exaggerated, catastrophic possibilities that feel paralyzing. But when you use negative visualization, you drag those fears into the light and examine them piece by piece. You imagine losing the deal, being rejected, failing publicly, and then you walk through what you would actually do if it happened. Suddenly, the fear transforms from an unstoppable monster into a manageable inconvenience. This mental rehearsal has a double benefit. It prepares you for adversity while deepening your gratitude for what you have now. When you visualize losing what you take for granted, your job, your health, your relationships, it sharpens your appreciation and reduces the panic that comes when things don't go perfectly. The real power of negative visualization lies in the shift from "I can't let this happen" to "even if this happens, I'll be okay." Once your mind accepts that you can handle the worst, you stop living in constant dread. You act with greater boldness because the fear of loss no longer dictates your moves. Instead of being imprisoned by what might go wrong, you're free to fully pursue what could go right. Anchor new habits to existing ones. Anchoring new habits to existing ones is the psychological shortcut that makes behavior change effortless instead of exhausting. At its core, it's about attaching the habit you want to build to something you already do automatically, so the established action becomes the trigger for the new one. Your brain loves patterns. Once it links two behaviors together, it stops treating the new habit as something foreign and starts treating it as part of the same routine. The reason most people fail at building habits isn't lack of willpower, it's friction. Starting something from scratch every day is mentally costly, and eventually you give up. But when you link the new action to a habit that's already burned into your neural wiring, you bypass the hardest part, remembering and initiating. If you already brush your teeth every morning, adding 2 minutes of meditation immediately afterward turns meditation into a natural extension of what you already do. If you make coffee daily, using that brewing time to write 3 sentences in your journal anchors writing into your morning flow. This method works because the existing habit acts as a stable cue, and cues are what make routines stick. Over time, the brain doesn't see 2 separate actions. It merges them into one sequence. The toothbrush means meditate. The coffee pot means write. The commute means listen to that audiobook. The power of habit anchoring is in its simplicity. You're not relying on motivation, which is unreliable. You're hitching a ride on something you'll do no matter what. Before long, the new habit feels less like a choice and more like the way your day naturally unfolds, quietly rewiring your identity without the struggle most people expect. Apply Parkinson's Law. Applying Parkinson's Law is about turning time from your enemy into your ally. Parkinson's Law states that work expands to fill the time you give it, meaning if you allow yourself a week to complete a 2-hour task, you'll somehow stretch it into 7 days of procrastination, overthinking, and unnecessary complexity. But when you deliberately shrink the time available, you force focus, eliminate fluff, and unleash a level of productivity that surprises you. This works because deadlines trigger urgency, and urgency silences the mental noise that usually slows you down. When the clock is ticking fast, you stop obsessing over perfection and start executing. Instead of wandering into rabbit holes or chasing distractions, your brain locks onto what actually matters. Suddenly, that proposal you've been putting off for days is finished in an hour. That cluttered room is spotless in 15 minutes because you told yourself guests are arriving soon. The beauty of Parkinson's law is that you can weaponize it. Give yourself absurdly short deadlines for tasks that don't need endless polishing, and watch how efficient you become. Write that email in 5 minutes. Finish that report before lunch. Create a presentation in an afternoon instead of a week. The time limit forces clarity. You decide what's essential and cut everything else. High achievers thrive on this principle, setting aggressive timelines not to rush quality, but to strip away wasted effort. When you learn to compress your work into smaller windows, you discover you're capable of more in less time. The secret isn't working harder. It's refusing to give time the chance to waste itself. Reframe I have to into I get to. Reframing I have to into I get to is a subtle linguistic shift that can completely transform your emotional state, turning obligation into privilege. At its core, this technique rewires how you perceive your responsibilities, not as burdens that drain you, but as opportunities that enrich your life. This small change in words flips the script in your mind, replacing resistance with gratitude and fueling you with the motivation to act. When you say, I have to, your brain hears it as a command, something forced upon you. It triggers feelings of pressure, resentment, and even quiet rebellion. But I get to reframes the exact same task as a choice, a chance, a gift. Suddenly, I have to go to work becomes I get to go to work. And in that shift, you remember there are people who would do anything to have your job, your income, your stability. I have to take care of my kids becomes I get to take care of my kids. And you're reminded that the chaos of parenthood is also the privilege of love. This isn't toxic positivity. It's a conscious reframing of perspective. The reality doesn't change, but your relationship with it does. You start noticing the value hidden inside the routine, the gratitude buried beneath the grind. The magic of this mental shift is that it doesn't just make you feel better, it changes your energy. People sense it in your tone, your posture, your presence. When you live in I get to, you move through life less like a prisoner of your duties and more like a willing participant in your own story. And that changes everything. Gamify boring tasks. Gamifying boring tasks is the art of transforming mundane, soul-draining work into something engaging by turning it into a challenge, a competition, or a reward-based system. It taps into your brain's love for play, progress, and achievement, 3 things that even the most disciplined people crave. When you gamify a task, you're not changing the work itself, you're changing how your brain experiences it. The human mind is wired to chase dopamine, the feel-good chemical released when we anticipate a reward. Boring tasks starve us of this stimulus, which is why they feel so exhausting before we even start. But by adding game-like elements, points, levels, time challenges, or streaks, you create a sense of urgency and fun that pulls you in instead of pushing you away. Folding laundry becomes a race against the clock. Cleaning your desk becomes a quest to beat your previous high score. Writing reports turns into earning points toward a reward you actually care about. The magic lies in creating immediate gratification in situations that normally offer only delayed rewards. When you see progress instantly, whether it's checking boxes, hitting milestones, or watching numbers climb, your brain floods with micro rewards that keep you engaged. Over time, you start to associate the once boring task with satisfaction instead of dread. Gamification also fuels competitiveness, either with yourself or others. Competing to finish first, maintaining a streak, or unlocking a next level activates a primal drive to keep going. You stop asking, "Do I have to?" and start asking, "Can I beat my last score?" By turning dull duties into personal challenges, gamification transforms obligation into motivation. The task doesn't change, but how it feels does, and that changes everything. Think in probabilities, not absolutes. Thinking in probabilities, not absolutes, is a mental shift that frees you from the trap of all or nothing thinking and gives you a strategic edge in decision making. Most people see the world in rigid terms: success or failure, right or wrong, win or lose. This black and white mindset feels comforting because it simplifies reality, but it's an illusion. Life is a spectrum of likelihoods, not certainties, and those who understand this can navigate complexity with clarity and confidence. When you think in probabilities, you stop asking, "Will this work?" and start asking, "How likely is this to work?" and what factors increase those odds. That single shift reframes your choices from emotional reactions to calculated bets. It's how elite investors, poker champions, and top strategists operate. They don't expect to be right all the time. They expect to tilt the odds in their favor over time. This mindset also kills the fear of failure. If you see outcomes as percentages, missing a target isn't a personal defeat. It's a natural part of a numbers game. Instead of obsessing over perfection, you focus on stacking small advantages, knowing that consistent high-probability decisions compound into massive wins. Thinking in absolutes narrows your options and blinds you to nuance. Thinking in probabilities forces you to gather data, consider alternatives, and prepare for multiple scenarios. You stop gambling on one fixed outcome and start playing a game you can win repeatedly. In a world addicted to certainty, the person comfortable with uncertainty and skilled at estimating the odds moves through chaos like a chess player who can already see 10 moves ahead. Focus on systems, not just goals. Focusing on systems instead of just goals is the shift that turns fleeting wins into sustained success. Goals are destinations. They tell you where you want to go. Systems are the engine, the habits, and the daily actions that get you there and keep you there. The truth is, anyone can set a goal. Millions of people declare they want to lose weight, earn more, or write a book every single year. But without a system, a goal is just a wish with an expiration date. When you obsess over the goal alone, you live in a constant state of not there yet. You measure success only when you reach the finish line, which makes every day until then feel like a loss. Systems flip the script. If your goal is to get fit, the system is working out at 7 a.m. every weekday, meal prepping every Sunday, and tracking your progress. If your goal is to grow a business, the system is making 5 sales calls a day, reviewing metrics weekly, and refining your offer monthly. Do your systems anchor you in the present? They remove decision fatigue because the process is already decided. You just show up and execute. They also make success inevitable because consistent input compounds into massive output over time. Champions, top performers, and innovators don't rely on goals alone. They live inside systems that produce results automatically. When you build a strong enough system, you no longer chase the goal chases you. And when that happens, progress is no longer a fight. It's the natural byproduct of the life you've designed. Keep a done list for momentum. Keeping a done list is the antidote to the invisible progress trap, the feeling that you're working constantly yet getting nowhere. At its core, this practice is about recording every single thing you've accomplished, no matter how small, and using that visible proof to fuel your momentum. While to-do lists focus on what's left undone, a done list flips your perspective. reminding you of how much you've already conquered. The human brain is wired to focus on gaps, not gains. You might finish 10 important tasks in a day, but the one thing you didn't complete becomes the thing you dwell on. This creates a constant sense of inadequacy, draining motivation over time. A done list breaks this cycle by giving your brain something tangible to celebrate. Every completed task, sending that email, making that call, finishing that workout, becomes another brick laid in the structure of your progress. The magic lies in momentum. Seeing a growing list of achievements creates a compounding effect. Progress becomes addictive. You start chasing the satisfaction of adding one more line to the list, which pushes you to keep moving. Even on days when energy is low, the sight of what you've already accomplished makes you feel capable, not behind. Done lists also reshape your identity. Instead of labeling yourself as someone who struggles to finish things, you start seeing yourself as someone who takes action consistently. This shift in self-image reinforces the habit, turning productivity into part of who you are. Over time, your done list becomes more than a record. It becomes undeniable evidence that you are capable of more than you think. Practice active recall when learning. Practicing active recall is one of the most potent learning techniques because it forces your brain to retrieve information rather than passively reviewing it. Instead of rereading notes or highlighting text, which gives you the comforting illusion of learning, active recall challenges your memory to work, strengthening the neural connections that make knowledge stick. It's the mental equivalent of weightlifting for your brain. When you passively consume information, your brain recognizes it in the moment, but doesn't store it deeply. That's why you can read something 5 times and still forget it when you need it. Active recall flips the process. You close the book, hide your notes, and try to write, speak, or think through what you just learned without looking. This effortful retrieval sends a powerful signal to your brain. This information matters. Keep it accessible. The struggle is the point. Every time you force yourself to recall, you're pulling the knowledge out of storage and re-encoding it, making it easier to access in the future. You're teaching your mind not just to recognize facts, but to own them. Over time, your recall speed and accuracy improve, and the information becomes part of your mental reflexes. Active recall also exposes the gaps in your understanding, the moments when you think you know something, but you can't explain it clearly. These gaps are gold because they tell you exactly where to focus your next round of study. It's uncomfortable at first because your brain craves the ease of recognition over the challenge of retrieval. But once you embrace the struggle, you discover that real learning doesn't happen when information goes in. It happens when you pull it back out. Use the teach it method to cement knowledge. The teach it method is the fastest way to transform information from something you've heard into something you own. At its core, it's the deliberate act of explaining what you've just learned to someone else, as if you were the teacher. This process forces your brain to organize, simplify, and clarify the information, turning vague understanding into sharp, unshakable knowledge. When you teach, you can't hide behind the illusion of knowing. You quickly discover the gaps in your understanding, the areas where your grasp is fuzzy, and the concepts you can't explain without stumbling. This awareness is priceless because it pushes you to fill those gaps until the material becomes second nature. Students learn passively, but teachers learn actively because they're responsible for making the idea make sense to someone else. The reason this works so powerfully is that teaching engages multiple cognitive processes at once. You recall the information from memory, translate it into your own words, and deliver it in a way that another mind can absorb. Each step strengthens neural pathways, making recall easier and the knowledge more durable. This method isn't limited to classrooms. You can teach by explaining a concept to a friend, writing a blog post, recording a voice note, or even speaking it aloud to an empty room. The act of verbalizing forces precision. You can't mumble your way through what you don't truly understand. Those who master the teach it method turn learning into a permanent upgrade. They don't just know, they can explain, persuade, and apply. And in a world drowning in passive learners, the ability to teach instantly elevates you into the small percentage who truly own what they know. Write before thinking is ready. Writing before your thinking feels ready is a creative power move that bypasses the perfectionist gatekeeper in your mind and taps directly into raw, unfiltered ideas. Most people wait until they believe they have the perfect sentence, the flawless plan, or the complete thought before putting pen to paper. But this delay kills momentum and suffocates creativity because clarity rarely comes before action. It comes from action. When you start writing before you feel ready, you give your brain permission to explore without the pressure of being brilliant. The act of writing forces thoughts that were swirling in the background to take shape. What feels fuzzy and abstract in your head starts to reveal patterns, connections, and insights the moment they hit the page. This technique works because the blank page is intimidating only when you treat it as a stage for finished work. When you treat it as a workbench instead, a place for messy, half-formed, chaotic drafts, you remove the fear of judgment, even from yourself, and in that safety, ideas pour out. Some of the most brilliant breakthroughs come from words you didn't plan to write, thoughts you didn't know you had until you saw them in front of you. That's because the brain thrives on iteration. You write something, you react to it, and your reaction sparks the next line. If you wait until you feel ready, you'll spend more time preparing to think than actually thinking. But when you write now and refine later, you discover that readiness isn't a prerequisite, it's the result. The page becomes your thinking partner, and the act of starting becomes the catalyst for the genius you've been waiting for. Focus on high-leverage activities. Focusing on high-leverage activities is the discipline of channeling your time, energy, and attention into the small set of actions that create disproportionately large results. At its core, this technique is about rejecting the seductive busyness of low-impact work and zeroing in on the moves that actually move the needle. It's not about doing more. It's about doing what matters most. Most people fall into the trap of activity over productivity, mistaking motion for progress. They fill their days with easy, comfortable tasks that make them feel busy but deliver little real change. High-leverage activities demand the opposite. They often feel uncomfortable, require deep focus, and may involve risk, but their payoff is exponential. These are the actions that, once done, make everything else easier or unnecessary. Closing a key deal, creating a scalable system, building a strategic partnership, mastering a skill that multiplies your capabilities. The power of leverage is in its compounding effect. 1 hour spent designing an automated system can save hundreds of hours later. One well-placed conversation can open doors that months of grinding never could. High-leverage work creates results that keep working for you long after the initial effort is over. But the challenge is psychological. Your brain craves the instant gratification of checking off easy tasks, while high-leverage activities often delay the dopamine hit. This is where discipline comes in. You have to train yourself to measure progress, not by the number of things you do, but by the impact those things create. When you consistently focus on the few actions with the greatest potential return, you stop being just busy. You start being unstoppable. Use the 80-20 principle ruthlessly. Using the 80-20 principle ruthlessly means committing to the uncomfortable truth that most of your results, whether in business, learning, or life, come from a tiny fraction of your actions. It's not just knowing that 20% of your efforts produce 80% of your outcomes. It's having the discipline to cut, ignore, or delegate the other 80% without guilt. This is where most people fail, not because they don't understand the rule, but because they're afraid to let go of the busy work that makes them feel productive. The principle exposes a hidden imbalance in everything. A few clients produce most of your revenue. A handful of habits shape most of your health. A small set of skills drives the bulk of your success. Yet, without ruthless prioritization, we spread ourselves thin, chasing the trivial many instead of the vital few. Applying it ruthlessly means asking, what are the highest leverage actions I can take right now, and being willing to kill the rest. It means being brave enough to disappoint people, decline opportunities, and abandon projects that don't move the needle. This is not laziness, it's precision. The emotional challenge is real. Letting go feels risky, like you're leaving money, opportunities, or safety on the table. But in reality, you're clearing the noise so your best work can dominate. When you double down on the 20% that matters, results compound at an almost unfair rate. The world rewards those who focus relentlessly on the few actions that create the most impact. Everything else is distraction disguised as duty. The moment you start cutting ruthlessly, your output doesn't just improve, it transforms. Keep a decision journal. Keeping a decision journal is a mental discipline that transforms decision-making from a guessing game into a science. At its heart is the practice of recording the key decisions you make, along with your reasoning, expectations, and emotional state at the time, so you can revisit them later and see exactly where you were right, wrong, or blinded by bias. Most people move through life believing their successes came from skill and their failures from bad luck, without ever dissecting the truth. A decision journal shatters that illusion. When you log your decisions in real time, you capture details your memory will later distort. You see not just what you decided, but why, what information you had, what assumptions you made, and what risks you were willing to take. Months later, when the outcome is clear, you can trace it back and see if your thinking was sound or flawed. This self-audit is brutally honest, but it's also the fastest way to refine your judgment. The power of this habit lies in the patterns it reveals. You might notice that you take bigger risks when you're overly optimistic, that you undervalue certain data, or that you're consistently too conservative in certain areas. With this awareness, you stop repeating costly mistakes and start stacking better choices. A decision journal turns every choice, big or small, into a learning investment. Over time, you don't just make decisions faster, you make them wiser, because you're guided not by memory or ego, but by an evolving record of your own thinking. It's like carrying a map of your mind's strengths and blind spots, one that sharpens with every entry. Schedule thinking time. Scheduling thinking time is the deliberate act of stepping away from the noise of doing so. You can focus on the deeper, more strategic work of deciding. In a world that glorifies constant action, most people never stop to think about whether they're moving in the right direction. They just run faster. But thinking time is where breakthroughs happen, where problems unravel, and where the scattered pieces of your life or business finally fit together. When you schedule thinking time, you're telling yourself that clarity is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Just like your phone can't function without recharging, your mind can't operate at its highest level without dedicated space to process, imagine, and evaluate. During this time, you're not multitasking, scrolling, or reacting. You're sitting with a question, a challenge, or a vision, and giving it your full, undivided mental energy. This works because the human brain is incredible at connecting dots, but only when it has breathing room. In the rush of daily life, urgent tasks scream for attention, while important ideas whisper. Thinking time turns up the volume on those whispers until they become crystal clear. It's in these quiet, uninterrupted moments that you'll see the hidden solutions to stubborn problems, spot opportunities others miss, and chart paths that feel obvious in hindsight. Leaders, creators, and top performers fiercely protect their thinking time because they know it multiplies the value of every hour they work afterward. Action without thought is motion without progress. but even a single hour of focused thinking can save weeks of wasted effort, and sometimes it can change the entire game. Use if-then planning. Using if-then planning is like installing mental autopilot for your goals. It pre-decides your actions before life can throw distractions, emotions, or excuses in your way. At its core, this technique links a specific situation, the if, to a predetermined action, the then, turning willpower into a script you can follow without thinking. The power lies in removing the hesitation gap, the moment when your brain debates whether or not to act, because you've already made the choice in advance. Our brains love patterns, and if-then planning gives them a clear one to follow. Instead of saying, "I'll try to work out more," you lock in a rule. If it's 7 a.m. on weekdays, then I put on my running shoes and start. If you want to network more, if I'm at a professional event, then I will introduce myself to at least 3 people. The vaguer your intentions, the easier they are to break. The clearer the trigger, the harder it is to ignore. This method is especially powerful under pressure. In moments of stress, fear, or temptation, decision-making becomes clouded. But an if-then plan bypasses that chaos, replacing it with a ready-made response. It turns discipline from a battle of will into a reflex. Psychologists have found that people who use if-then planning are far more likely to achieve their goals, not because they're more motivated, but because they've built an automatic chain reaction between cue and action. When life gets unpredictable, the people with the clearest mental scripts win. It's not magic, it's preparation disguised as inevitability. Stack habits for exponential growth. Stacking habits for exponential growth is the strategy of linking a new behavior to one you already do automatically, creating a chain of actions that compounds over time. This works because your brain runs on cues. Every habit you have starts with a trigger. By anchoring a new habit to an existing one, you bypass the friction of remembering, deciding, or forcing willpower. Instead, you ride the momentum of something you're already doing. The beauty lies in how small this can start. If you brush your teeth every morning, you can do 10 push-ups immediately afterward. If you make coffee, you can write 3 sentences in a journal as the next step. Over days and weeks, these actions stop feeling separate. They fuse into one seamless ritual. Your brain starts to see the trigger and automatically execute the whole chain without thinking. Habit stacking creates exponential growth because habits compound like interest. 1 push-up becomes 10, 10 becomes 20, 3 sentences turn into pages. Over time, you're not just adding actions, you're building a system that expands naturally without extra effort. The real power is in the psychological shift. Instead of trying to overhaul your life with massive change, you simply piggyback on what you're already doing. There's no mental negotiation, no daily decision fatigue, just a quiet, consistent expansion of who you are. Most people fail at building habits because they rely on motivation. Habit stacking eliminates that weakness. You don't need to get inspired to change. You just need to attach the change to something you already do. Once linked, the growth becomes automatic, unstoppable, and compounding in ways that feel almost effortless. Use deadlines as creative constraints. Using deadlines as creative constraints is the art of turning time pressure into a weapon for focus, productivity, and innovation. Most people see deadlines as stress-inducing ultimatums, but when used intentionally, they become powerful psychological triggers that silence overthinking, force decisive action, and spark unexpected creativity. At its core, this method relies on a truth about human behavior. We rarely act at full capacity without a boundary to push against. Without a deadline, the mind wanders. Perfectionism creeps in. Tasks expand endlessly to fill the available time, draining momentum until you feel trapped in almost done forever. A well-set deadline snaps you out of that haze. It creates urgency, which sharpens attention and cuts away the luxury of hesitation. You stop entertaining 100 possible approaches and commit to one path because the clock is ticking. Paradoxically, deadlines can also free creativity. When time is unlimited, the brain clings to safe ideas, endlessly refining them instead of exploring bold, untested ones. But when time is scarce, you bypass the inner critic and tap into raw, instinctive problem solving. Many of history's most brilliant works, from last-minute speeches to groundbreaking designs, were born in the pressure cooker of a looming cutoff. The key is to make deadlines challenging but realistic. Too short, and you panic into sloppy work. Too long, and you slip back into procrastination. The sweet spot forces focus without sacrificing quality. When you learn to wield deadlines not as threats, but as creative boundaries, you stop fearing the clock and start using it as a catalyst. Every tick becomes fuel, every second a reminder that clarity and courage live on the edge of running out of time. Break patterns to spark new ideas. Breaking patterns to spark new ideas is the intentional act of disrupting your usual ways of thinking, behaving, or working so your brain can escape its comfort loops. The human mind is wired for efficiency. It loves routines, habits, and predictable sequences. While this is great for survival, it's terrible for creativity because doing things the same way every time trains your brain to produce the same results. New ideas require new neural connections, and those only form when you interrupt the autopilot. When you deliberately break a pattern, you jolt your brain out of its default mode and force it to process information differently. It can be as simple as working in a new environment, taking a different route to work, flipping your daily schedule, or brainstorming with people outside your usual circle. These shifts seem small, but they pull you out of mental ruts and expose you to perspectives you would have never encountered otherwise. This works because novelty lights up the brain's reward system and activates creative problem-solving regions that stay dormant during routine. Think about the ideas you've had while traveling, walking in a place you've never been, or talking to someone from a completely different background. Those sparks happen because you broke the familiar rhythm. The most innovative thinkers engineer these breaks on purpose. They know comfort breeds repetition, and repetition breeds stale thinking. By challenging your own patterns, you invite the unexpected, and it's in the unexpected, those strange, slightly uncomfortable moments, that ideas you've never considered suddenly come alive. Practice opposite thinking. Practicing opposite thinking is the mental jolt that breaks you free from stale patterns and predictable results. At its core, this technique means deliberately flipping your default assumptions and asking, what if I did the exact opposite of what I would normally do? It's a way to shatter mental ruts, uncover hidden options, and discover solutions you never knew existed. Human beings are creatures of habit. We fall into repetitive cycles of thought and action because they feel safe, familiar, and efficient. But the same thinking that got you here is often the same thinking that keeps you stuck. Opposite thinking disrupts that loop by forcing your brain into unfamiliar territory where creativity and insight thrive. If your instinct is to play it safe in a business deal, you ask, what if I took the boldest risk instead? If your default is to avoid conflict, you ask, what if I addressed it directly and now? This method works because it exposes blind spots. We rarely question the assumptions driving our decisions, but flipping them upside down forces us to see from angles we normally ignore. Sometimes the opposite path won't be the right one, but the mere act of exploring it unlocks fresh perspectives that make the original choice sharper. Opposite thinking also fuels innovation. Many groundbreaking ideas in history came from those who did the reverse of conventional wisdom, challenging what everyone else assumed was fixed truth. By practicing this intentionally, you train your mind to think in possibilities, not limitations. And once you see that the opposite of your comfort zone is often where the breakthrough lives, your entire decision-making process changes forever. Use environment cues to trigger action. Using environment cues to trigger action is about designing the spaces around you so they silently push you toward the behaviors you want and away from the ones you don't. It's the recognition that willpower is fragile, but environment is constant. And if you shape your surroundings strategically, you can make good choices almost automatic. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine, and every object, sight, and sound around you is a cue pulling you toward a specific behavior. A book on your nightstand invites you to read before bed. A bowl of fruit in plain sight nudges you toward healthier eating. A cluttered desk whispers procrastination. Without realizing it, you respond to these triggers all day long. The key is to take control of them. By placing cues in your environment, you can turn intentions into action without mental struggle. If you want to work out in the morning, lay out your clothes and shoes the night before. If you want to practice guitar daily, keep it on a stand in the middle of your living room instead of locked in a case. If you want to cut down on social media, remove the apps from your phone and keep your device in another room during deep work. This works because you're no longer fighting habits with raw discipline. You're making the right choice the path of least resistance. Over time, the cues become so tied to the behavior that seeing them instantly primes your brain to act. Your environment is always shaping you, either by default or by design. When you take control of your cues, you take control of your actions, and when you take control of your actions, you take control of your life. Batch similar tasks. Batching similar tasks is the mental hack that turns scattered energy into a concentrated force, allowing you to get more done in less time with less mental strain. At its core, batching means grouping tasks of the same nature, emails, phone calls, content creation, errands, and doing them in focused blocks instead of sprinkling them throughout your day. The reason this works so powerfully is because of a hidden productivity killer: context switching. Every time you jump between different types of tasks, your brain burns time and energy reorienting itself, leaving you slower, less focused, and more prone to mistakes. When you batch, you eliminate that constant reset. You enter a single mental mode and stay there until the block is done. Answering 10 emails at once takes far less time than replying to them sporadically between meetings. Filming 5 videos in one sitting is exponentially faster than filming one a day. Even errands, when grouped into a single trip, save hours of stop-start driving. This technique also creates a rhythm your brain thrives on. Once you sink into a batch, your focus deepens, your speed increases, and your quality improves. You're no longer spending half your day warming up for tasks. You're operating in peak efficiency for extended stretches. The emotional payoff is just as important. Instead of feeling like you're constantly juggling 100 little things, batching lets you cross entire categories off your mental list. It reduces decision fatigue, lowers stress, and gives you the satisfaction of making huge dents in your workload at once. In a distracted world, batching is how you reclaim your attention, your time, and your sense of control. Use the 2-minute rule. The 2-minute rule is a deceptively simple productivity weapon that eliminates procrastination by removing your brain's favorite excuse: "I'll do it later." The rule is straightforward. If a task will take less than 2 minutes, do it immediately. No negotiating, no overthinking, no putting it on a list for the future. Just do it now. This works because the mental cost of carrying an unfinished task is often greater than the effort to simply complete it. When you put off small actions, sending a quick email, washing a dish, filing a document, they don't disappear. They sit in the background of your mind, adding invisible stress and cluttering your mental space. This low-level anxiety eats at your focus and energy, making bigger tasks harder to tackle. By completing micro tasks instantly, you clear that mental backlog and your brain feels lighter, sharper, and more in control. But the 2-minute rule is more than just a way to clean up small tasks. It's a momentum trigger. Often, starting is the hardest part of anything. Telling yourself you'll work on something just for 2 minutes bypasses resistance. Once you start, you almost always keep going. 2 minutes of tidying becomes a full room cleanup. 2 minutes of reading becomes an entire chapter. 2 minutes of writing becomes a productive session. High performers love this rule because it compounds. Dozens of small actions done instantly each day create a tidal wave of progress. The magic isn't in the 2 minutes, it's in the way those 2 minutes dismantle the wall between intention and action, making movement your default state instead of hesitation. Think in terms of opportunity cost. Thinking in terms of opportunity cost is the discipline of measuring every decision, not just by what it gives you, but by what it silently takes away. At its core, this technique forces you to acknowledge that saying yes to one thing always means saying no to something else, whether that's time, money, energy, or another path you'll never get back. It's about seeing the invisible price tag attached to every choice. Most people evaluate decisions in isolation. They ask, "What will this give me?" without considering the equally important question, "What will I lose by choosing this?" The truth is, time and resources are finite. Every hour you spend on low-impact work is an hour you can't invest in something life-changing. Every dollar you waste on instant gratification is a dollar you can't invest in your future freedom. The cost isn't just the thing itself, it's the better thing you didn't choose. This mindset sharpens your decision-making like nothing else. Suddenly, scrolling on your phone for 30 minutes isn't just harmless downtime. It's 30 minutes stolen from building your dream, mastering a skill, or deepening a relationship. Saying yes to a safe, mediocre opportunity means saying no to the high-risk, high-reward one that could have changed your life. When you start seeing the hidden trade-offs behind every decision, you stop living on autopilot. You become ruthless about where you put your time and focus because you realize the real cost of a choice is not just the price you pay, it's the potential you sacrifice. And once you feel that truth deeply, your standards rise instantly. Apply the 1% daily improvement rule. Applying the 1% daily improvement rule is the disciplined commitment to get just a tiny bit better every single day, knowing that small, consistent gains compound into extraordinary results over time. It's not about massive leaps or overnight transformations. It's about the quiet, almost invisible progress that stacks into something unstoppable. The power lies in compounding. A 1% improvement today seems insignificant, almost laughable, but 1% compounded over a year is not 365% better. It's nearly 38 times better. This is the math of mastery. Small, sustained gains create exponential growth. While most people burn out chasing perfection in short bursts, those who focus on daily increments build momentum that becomes impossible to ignore. The real magic of the 1% rule is that it removes the intimidation of big goals. Instead of staring at the peak of a mountain and feeling paralyzed, you just focus on the next small step upward. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be slightly better than you were yesterday. That shift transforms improvement from an overwhelming challenge into an achievable habit. It's not just about skills or performance. It applies to every area of life. Reading one more page each day deepens your knowledge. Saving a little more money each week transforms your finances. Strengthening a relationship with a single kind gesture compounds into deep trust over years. Most people underestimate what they can achieve with patient consistency. The 1% rule is a promise to yourself. No matter how small the action, you will end the day stronger, smarter, or more prepared than you started. And over time, that makes you unstoppable. Remove one option to make decisions faster. Removing one option to make decisions faster is the counterintuitive mental hack that cuts through paralysis and forces clarity. Most people believe that more choices equal more freedom, but psychology proves the opposite. Too many options create decision fatigue, hesitation, and regret. When the mind is faced with endless possibilities, it begins to spiral through what-if scenarios, overanalyzing until the moment for action slips away. By deliberately eliminating one option, you reduce mental clutter and force your focus onto what's truly viable. This works because choice overload is a silent killer of momentum. Think of a buffet with 50 dishes. You stand there, overwhelmed, afraid to commit because you might miss out on something better. But if half the options were gone, you'd pick quickly and enjoy your meal without second-guessing. The same applies to business decisions, creative projects, or even daily life. Fewer options mean faster, more confident choices. Eliminating an option isn't about limiting your potential. It's about removing distractions that dilute your energy. By crossing one path off the map, you give the others more mental real estate. You stop juggling endless maybes and start committing to action. The moment you narrow your field, the fog clears, and what matters most stands out. The power of this technique is in its simplicity. Sometimes the fastest way to choose isn't to add more pros and cons. It's to take one possibility off the table entirely. The decision you make afterward will come quicker, feel lighter, and carry more conviction because you're no longer swimming in a sea of endless what-ifs. Visualize worst case to reduce anxiety. Visualizing the worst-case scenario is a counterintuitive mental strategy that strips fear of its power by dragging it out of the shadows and forcing it into the light. Most anxiety comes from the unknown, the vague, swirling what-ifs that haunt your mind without ever taking a clear form. When you deliberately imagine the absolute worst thing that could happen in vivid detail, you remove its mystery. You see it, name it, and realize you can survive it. This technique works because fear thrives on avoidance. The more you try not to think about something, the more power it gains over you. But when you lean in and mentally walk yourself through the worst possible outcome, your brain stops treating it like an unspeakable threat. Often, you'll discover the worst case is far less catastrophic than your imagination made it. Even if it's truly bad, the act of visualizing it forces you to think of ways you'd handle it. Picture losing the deal, failing the presentation, or hearing no from the person you wanted to impress. See it play out, feel the sting, then visualize your next move, what you do to recover, adapt, and rebuild. This transforms the unknown terror into a challenge you've already mentally rehearsed. The result is emotional armor. You stop living in fear of collapse because you've already stood in the rubble and seen yourself move forward. Ironically, preparing for the worst frees you to pursue the best, because when you know you can survive failure, it no longer has the power to hold you back. Keep a personal idea bank. Keeping a personal idea bank is like building a private vault where your sparks of inspiration can be stored, protected, and multiplied over time. At its core, this technique is about capturing every thought, insight, or creative impulse the moment it appears, no matter how small, raw, or seemingly irrelevant, so it never gets lost to the noise of daily life. Ideas are fragile. They fade quickly if not recorded, and once they're gone, they're almost impossible to recreate with the same intensity. The brain is a terrible storage unit. You might think you'll remember that million-dollar concept you had in the shower, but without a system, it dissolves within hours. An idea bank changes that. Whether it's a digital note app, a journal, or a voice memo folder, it becomes your constant companion, ready to catch every flash of insight before it slips away. Over time, you'll see patterns emerge, connections form, and half-formed ideas evolve into fully realized plans. The real magic is in compounding creativity. When you revisit your bank, old ideas collide with new perspectives, and what once seemed ordinary becomes extraordinary. A throwaway line from months ago might become the missing piece of your next project. A late-night scribble might spark a business strategy years later. Having an idea bank also changes how you see the world. You become more observant, more curious, because you're constantly looking for material to capture. Life becomes a hunt for inspiration, and your creativity no longer depends on fleeting bursts. It's fueled by an ever-growing reservoir of possibilities that's always ready when you need it most. Avoid sunk cost fallacy. Avoiding the sunk cost fallacy is the ability to cut your losses and walk away from a failing path, no matter how much time, money, or energy you've already invested. It's one of the hardest mental skills to master because it means admitting that your past efforts no longer justify your present decisions. Yet, the moment you free yourself from this trap, you stop throwing good resources after bad and start making choices based solely on future potential. The sunk cost fallacy is fueled by ego and emotion. You tell yourself, I've already spent so much, I can't quit now. You keep going in a doomed relationship because of the years together. You cling to a business that's bleeding money because you've poured your savings into it. You suffer through a project you hate because you've already invested too many late nights. The truth is, those costs are gone forever. They can't be recovered, no matter what you do next. The danger is that this thinking chains you to a losing game. Every extra hour, dollar, or ounce of energy you give to something that's not working steals those resources from something that could work. The most successful people don't cling to the past. They pivot quickly when the return no longer justifies the effort. Avoiding the sunk cost fallacy requires brutal honesty. You must ask, if I weren't already invested, would I still choose this today? If the answer is no, the path forward is clear. Freedom comes when you stop letting past sacrifices dictate your future and start making decisions for where you want to go, not for what you've already lost. Speak in stories for persuasion. Speaking in stories for persuasion is the ancient, primal skill that bypasses logic and speaks directly to the emotional core of the human mind. Facts inform, but stories transform, because we are wired to remember narratives far more deeply than raw data. Long before humans had written language, we passed down knowledge, values, and survival strategies through storytelling. That wiring still controls how we connect, trust, and decide. When you speak in stories, you give your audience something they can see, hear, and feel. You take abstract ideas and wrap them in characters, struggles, and resolutions that make them real. Instead of saying persistence leads to success, you tell the story of the entrepreneur who failed 5 times before creating a billion-dollar company. Instead of explaining the dangers of a bad decision in dry terms, you share the gripping account of the person who lived through it. The listener's brain doesn't just hear the story, it experiences it. Neuroscience reveals why this works. Stories trigger multiple parts of the brain simultaneously: sensory, emotional, and cognitive, creating an immersive experience that makes your message unforgettable. They also activate mirror neurons, causing listeners to feel what the characters feel, building empathy and trust. Persuasion thrives on connection, and stories are connection machines. They lower defenses, sneak past skepticism, and plant ideas so deeply they feel like the listener's own. A well-told story doesn't just win an argument, it reshapes belief. In negotiations, leadership, marketing, or personal influence, facts may prove your point, but stories make people care. And when they care, they act. Not because you told them to, but because they've already lived your message in their mind. Pause before reacting emotionally. Pausing before reacting emotionally is the difference between being controlled by your emotions and using them as a tool. In the heat of the moment, when anger flares, fear spikes, or frustration boils over, your brain shifts into survival mode. Logic shuts down, your vision narrows, and instinct takes over. This is when words get spoken that can't be unsaid, decisions get made that can't be undone, and damage is done that can take years to repair. The pause is your lifeline. Even just a few seconds of intentional stillness gives your rational mind time to re-engage. This short circuit breaks the chain between trigger and reaction, allowing you to choose your next move instead of being dragged into it. That pause might be a deep breath, counting to 5, sipping water, or even physically stepping back. But its effect is massive. When you pause, you give yourself the power to ask, what outcome do I really want here? Instead of escalating a conflict, you might redirect it. Instead of firing off a regrettable email, you might craft a calculated response. Instead of letting someone else's bad mood hijack your own, you maintain your center. This works because emotions are chemical storms. They peak and fade quickly if you let them pass instead of fueling them. Pausing creates that gap, and in that gap, you become dangerous in the best way, not because you react faster, but because you respond wiser. The pause isn't weakness, it's restraint. And restraint, in a world addicted to instant reactions, is pure power. Reframe failure as feedback. Reframing failure as feedback is the mental alchemy that turns what most people fear into the very fuel that drives you forward. At its core, this technique is about stripping failure of its sting and redefining it as nothing more than information, signals that tell you what worked, what didn't, and what to adjust next time. When you see failure not as proof of inadequacy, but as data for growth, it stops being an enemy and becomes a teacher. Most people interpret failure as a verdict on their worth. They let it shame them, stall them, or convince them they're not capable. But failure, in truth, is neutral. It's a mirror reflecting the gap between what you attempted and what actually happened. The emotion you attach to it is a choice, and if you choose to see it as feedback, it becomes an asset. Every misstep reveals hidden variables, a strategy that needs tweaking, a skill that needs sharpening, a blind spot you couldn't see before. The lesson isn't in the success you hope for. It's in the miss that showed you how to get closer next time. Some of the most iconic breakthroughs in history were born from repeated failures, each one sharpening the creator's vision until they struck gold. The people who rise the fastest aren't the ones who avoid failure. They're the ones who mine it for wisdom with almost ruthless curiosity. They treat every setback as a stepping stone, not a stop sign. Because once you stop fearing failure, you stop holding back, and that's when your progress accelerates beyond anything you thought possible. Ask, what would future me thank me for? Asking, what would future me thank me for, is a mental time travel technique that slices through indecision and procrastination by forcing you to align your choices with your long-term self-interest. It shifts your perspective from the impatient, comfort-seeking present self to the wiser, more disciplined version of you that you are becoming. This single question reframes the decision-making process, pulling you out of short-term emotion and into long-term vision. In the moment, it's easy to chase comfort, avoid discomfort, or delay action. Skipping the workout feels harmless. Spending the money feels justified. Putting off the hard conversation feels easier. But when you pause and project yourself into the future, imagining the version of you who has lived with the consequences, the answer often becomes painfully clear. That future self either thanks you for your discipline or resents you for your neglect. This question is powerful because it engages your brain's empathy, not for others, but for yourself. You feel the emotional weight of regret before it happens, and you feel the pride of follow-through before you've even taken action. Regret becomes a warning signal, and pride becomes a pull toward the right choice. Over time, this habit rewires your default thinking. You stop making choices just to feel better now, and you start making choices to be better later. And every time you align your actions with the version of you that you want to become, you shrink the gap between who you are today and the person you know you could be. This is how small moments create a life you're proud to look back on. Use constraint thinking to solve creatively. Constraint thinking is the mental shift that turns limits into launch pads for innovation. Most people see constraints, lack of time, money, resources, or options, as walls that block possibility. But in reality, constraints are the very conditions that force your brain to think differently, dig deeper, and uncover solutions you would never have considered with unlimited freedom. It's in restriction, not abundance, that creativity often thrives. The human mind is naturally drawn to the path of least resistance. When everything is available, you choose the obvious, familiar route. But when resources are stripped away, you're pushed into unfamiliar territory, forced to explore angles you would normally overlook. History is full of breakthroughs born from constraints. Artists painting masterpieces with only 3 colors, entrepreneurs building million-dollar companies from a garage, innovators designing life-saving tools with scavenged materials. Constraint thinking reframes limitation as a challenge, not a curse. Instead of asking, "How can I get more?" you ask, "How can I do more with what I already have?" That single question flips the mental switch from scarcity to ingenuity. You stop focusing on what's missing and start exploiting every ounce of what's available. This method also kills perfectionism. With constraints, you don't have the luxury to endlessly tweak or chase ideal conditions. You act, adapt, and refine on the fly. The clock, the budget, or the space forces you to commit, and commitment is where momentum lives. When you master constraint thinking, you stop waiting for perfect resources to appear. You realize the very thing you thought was holding you back is the thing that will set your creativity on fire. The limit becomes the edge that sharpens your brilliance. Prime your mind before sleep. Priming your mind before sleep is the practice of deliberately feeding your brain the thoughts, images, and intentions you want it to work on while you rest. Sleep isn't just a shutdown, it's a workshop. Your subconscious is wide awake, sorting memories, solving problems, and making sense of the day. If you go to bed replaying worries, arguments, or failures, you hand your mind poison to marinate in. But if you prime it with purposeful thoughts, you hand it blueprints for building the future you want. This works because the brain is incredibly suggestible in the moments before sleep. Whatever you focus on during that fragile twilight between waking and dreaming sinks deep into your subconscious, shaping both your dreams and the way you feel when you wake up. High performers, inventors, and creatives have used this for centuries. Edison, Tesla, and Einstein were known to plant problems or visions in their minds before sleeping, trusting that answers would surface. To prime your mind, vividly imagine the life you want or the outcome you seek. Picture it like a movie. Hear the sounds, feel the emotions, see the details, or focus on a challenge and visualize yourself solving it with ease. You can also use affirmations, gratitude lists, or simply replay moments of progress and wins from your day. The beauty of this practice is that it stacks the odds in your favor. You're not just drifting into unconsciousness. You're programming your mind to work for you while you sleep. When you open your eyes in the morning, you wake not only rested, but aligned, motivated, and already one step closer to what you want. Learn in spaced intervals. Learning in spaced intervals is the science-backed way to make knowledge stick permanently, turning short-term memorization into deep, lasting mastery. At its core, this technique is about revisiting information at increasing gaps of time. First hours later, then days, then weeks. So your brain is forced to recall and re-strengthen the memory each time. This deliberate spacing transforms learning from a fading echo into a solid mental imprint you can access effortlessly. Most people cram information into their heads in one exhausting session, only to forget most of it within days. This isn't a flaw in intelligence, it's how the brain works. Without repetition and recall, neural connections weaken. But spaced learning takes advantage of the brain's forgetting curve by reactivating the memory just before it's about to fade. which strengthens the pathways until they become nearly unshakable. The process works because each recall forces your brain to work harder to retrieve the information, and this struggle signals to your mind that it's important. The harder you work to recall, the deeper the memory embeds itself. Instead of drowning in endless study, you're giving your brain bursts of high-quality reinforcement. This is why elite learners, language polyglots, memory champions, top academics structure their study into small, repeated sessions rather than endless marathons. The information becomes familiar yet fresh, challenging yet achievable, and your brain treats it like a skill you actually need. When you learn in spaced intervals, you stop wasting time on relearning what you've already forgotten. Every review locks the knowledge deeper. Every gap makes the next recall easier. And soon, what once felt like effort becomes second nature, ready to be used whenever you need it most. Focus on inputs you control. Focusing on inputs you control is the mental discipline of pouring your energy into the actions, habits, and decisions within your power, while releasing the obsession with outcomes you can't dictate. It's the realization that the path to success and peace is built not on controlling the uncontrollable, but on mastering your own execution. Most people live in a state of quiet frustration because they tie their happiness and motivation to results, whether it's landing the deal, getting the promotion, or winning someone's approval. But outcomes are influenced by countless external factors: timing, other people's decisions, market shifts, even sheer luck. When your self-worth hinges on these, you surrender control of your emotional state to forces beyond you. Focusing on inputs flips the script. You can't control whether a client says yes, but you can control how many high-quality proposals you send. You can't control whether your content goes viral, but you can control the consistency, quality, and effort you put into creating it. You can't control the exact pace of your progress in fitness, but you can control what you eat, how often you train, and how well you recover. This mindset is liberating because it removes the paralyzing fear of failure. When you measure success by your effort, process, and consistency, not just the scoreboard, you win even when the result takes time to show. Ironically, when you release the need to control outcomes and double down on inputs, results often improve dramatically. You act without desperation, you persist longer, and you adapt faster. By mastering what you can control, you create the conditions where everything else falls into place. Use the one-word theme for the year. The one-word theme for the year is a mental clarity tool that slices through scattered resolutions and endless to-do lists by anchoring your entire year to a single guiding principle. Instead of chasing a dozen disconnected goals, you choose one word that embodies the essence of who you want to be and how you want to live. That word becomes your compass. Every decision, habit, and opportunity is filtered through it. Most people start the year overloaded with intentions, but as months pass, the noise of life buries them. A single word cuts through that noise. If your word is discipline, you ask yourself daily, does this action strengthen my discipline? If your word is growth, you lean toward challenges and discomfort. If your word is presence, you stop multitasking and focus on the moment in front of you. The word becomes a silent but constant whisper, shaping choices without the need for endless self-reminders. Psychologically, one word works because the brain craves simplicity. A single emotionally charged word is easier to remember, harder to ignore, and more likely to trigger action than a list of vague intentions. It's not just a goal, it's an identity you step into. Over time, you begin to become the word. The beauty of this method is its adaptability. Your word can guide your work, relationships, health, and personal growth without feeling rigid. You're not locked into specific outcomes. You're aligned with a direction. And when you embody your theme so deeply that it's second nature, the year doesn't just change, you do. Practice mental contrasting. Mental contrasting is the art of balancing the intoxicating pull of your dreams with the sobering weight of reality. It's not blind optimism, and it's not cynical pessimism. It's the fusion of both. At its core, this technique has two steps. First, you vividly imagine your desired future in rich detail, letting yourself feel the pride, relief, and joy of achieving it. Then, you immediately contrast it with the current obstacles standing in your way. This pairing ignites both hope and urgency, creating a powerful internal drive. Most people do one without the other. Dreamers imagine success without considering the friction ahead, leaving themselves unprepared when reality pushes back. Realists focus only on the obstacles, smothering their motivation before they take the first step. Mental contrasting bridges these extremes. It tricks your brain into emotionally committing to the vision while also activating the problem-solving regions that figure out how to overcome the roadblocks. When you see both the reward and the resistance in one mental frame, you develop what psychologists call goal commitment. You're no longer passively wishing, you're actively plotting. You might picture your business thriving, then confront the fact that you have no marketing plan, or visualize finishing a marathon, then acknowledge you can barely run 2 miles. That collision between desire and reality sparks a clear path forward. The magic of mental contrasting is that it forces honesty without killing hope. You don't just fantasize about the life you want. You prepare for it, fight for it, and build it brick by brick. And because you've already seen both the dream and the grind, nothing that comes your way feels unexpected. Seek asymmetric bets. Seeking asymmetric bets is the strategy of finding opportunities where the potential upside massively outweighs the downside, creating situations where even small risks can lead to life-changing rewards. At its core, this technique is about hunting for scenarios where the worst-case outcome is limited, but the best-case outcome is exponential, where the math of the gamble is stacked so heavily in your favor that not taking the shot is the bigger risk. Most people approach decisions with an unconscious balance of fear and reward, avoiding anything uncertain because they overestimate the danger. But asymmetric bets flip that mindset. You actively search for opportunities where losing costs you little more than time, effort, or ego, while winning could multiply your wealth, influence, skills, or freedom many times over. These bets are everywhere if you train yourself to see them. Applying for a position you feel underqualified for, pitching a bold idea to someone far above your level, testing a small business idea with minimal upfront costs, reaching out to a potential mentor who could open doors for you. If nothing comes from it, you lose almost nothing. But if it works, the ripple effect can reshape your entire trajectory. The magic of asymmetric bets is that you can take many of them. Because the downside is small, you can keep stacking attempts without fear of ruin. And with each try, the probability of hitting one game-changing win increases dramatically. In a world where most people only take safe bets, the person who consistently places asymmetric ones builds a portfolio of opportunities so tilted in their favor that sooner or later one of them explodes, and that single win can outweigh 100 small losses. Build mental models for decision-making. Building mental models for decision-making is about creating a set of thinking frameworks that help you cut through complexity, filter noise, and see problems from angles most people miss. A mental model is like a lens. Once you have it, you can apply it to countless situations to make faster, smarter, and more accurate choices. Instead of approaching each problem from scratch, you have a toolbox of proven thought patterns to guide you. The power of mental models lies in how they compress wisdom. The Pareto principle, 80-20, teaches you to focus on the vital few instead of the trivial many. First principles thinking forces you to break problems down to their raw truths instead of accepting assumptions. Inversion flips your perspective, asking not, how do I succeed, but how do I avoid failure? Each model reshapes the way you think. and the more you collect, the sharper your decision-making becomes. Most people rely on gut instinct shaped by limited experience. Mental models let you borrow centuries of insight from science, psychology, economics, and philosophy. This gives you an unfair advantage because you're no longer reacting blindly. You're applying tested frameworks that have worked in entirely different domains. Building mental models requires intentional learning. You collect them from books, conversations, mistakes, and observation, then refine them by applying them in real decisions. Over time, your brain begins to automatically scan problems through multiple models, spotting patterns others overlook. The more models you master, the more clearly you see the world. And when you see clearly, you don't just make better decisions. You make decisions that look obvious in hindsight to everyone else who couldn't see them in the moment. Use the rule of 3 for focus. The rule of 3 for focus is the mental clarity hack that cuts through the chaos of modern life by forcing you to prioritize what truly matters. At its core, it means choosing just 3 main outcomes to focus on each day, each week, and even each year. Not 30, not 13, 3. The limitation is deliberate because when everything is a priority, nothing is. Most people drown in endless to-do lists, mistaking movement for progress. They scatter their energy across dozens of tasks, leaving each one half done and themselves exhausted. The rule of 3 reverses this by narrowing your aim. Each morning you ask, if I could only accomplish 3 things today, what would make the biggest difference? The same question applies to your week and your year. This process forces brutal honesty about what moves the needle and what's just busy work. Psychologically, 3 is the magic number. The brain can hold and recall small sets far better than long lists, and focusing on 3 clear targets makes them feel achievable, not overwhelming. It's enough to make meaningful progress, but not so much that you dilute your energy. The beauty of this method is that it doesn't kill ambition, it amplifies it. By hitting your top 3 with full intensity, you create visible momentum, which fuels motivation to tackle the next set. Over time, the compounding effect is enormous. When you master the rule of 3, you stop living in reaction mode. Instead of scattering your focus like broken glass, you direct it like a laser, precisely, powerfully, and toward the things that actually change your life. Ask, what's missing? Not just what's wrong. Asking what's missing instead of only what's wrong is a mental shift that changes the way you approach problems, opportunities, and growth. When something isn't working, most people fixate on what's broken, hunting for flaws, mistakes, and failures. While that can prevent disaster, it rarely leads to true breakthroughs because focusing only on what's wrong keeps you trapped in a defensive mindset. Asking what's missing flips your perspective from repair to creation. This works because the human brain has a built-in negativity bias. It's wired to scan for threats and errors. That bias helps you survive, but it can also blind you to possibilities that aren't yet visible. When you ask what's missing, you're not just looking for the crack in the wall, you're looking for the doorway that hasn't been built yet. It's an invitation to think expansively, to spot hidden gaps that could become openings for innovation, connection, or growth. Imagine a struggling business. Asking what's wrong might reveal poor sales, outdated process, or low morale. Important, yes, but asking what's missing could uncover that there's no clear brand story, no premium offer, no customer community. Those aren't problems to patch. They're opportunities to create something new. In relationships, careers, and personal goals, this question transforms your mindset from reactive to proactive. You stop just trying to avoid failure and start actively designing success. What's wrong fixes the past. What's missing builds the future. And the moment you start asking it, you stop being a problem solver and start becoming an architect of possibility. Seek disconfirming evidence. Seeking disconfirming evidence is the rare discipline of deliberately searching for proof that you might be wrong, an act that feels uncomfortable but is one of the fastest paths to truth, clarity, and better decision-making. At its core, this technique forces you to challenge your own beliefs, assumptions, and convictions instead of clinging to them. Most people collect confirming evidence like trophies, seeking only the facts and opinions that make them feel safe in their worldview. But the mind that chases disconfirming evidence grows sharper, stronger, and far harder to deceive. This practice is so powerful because of how deeply our brains crave validation. We experience a dopamine hit when something agrees with us, and we instinctively avoid anything that threatens our sense of certainty. The problem is that certainty without challenge breeds blind spots, and blind spots lead to bad decisions. Seeking disconfirming evidence doesn't just protect you from being wrong, it forces you to see the full picture, even the parts you'd rather ignore. When you actively ask, "What would prove me wrong?" or "Where could my thinking be flawed?" you weaken the grip of bias. You start inviting in perspectives, data, and counter-arguments that refine your judgment instead of clouding it. This is why top investors, scientists, and strategists hunt for opposing views. They know that being right after you've tried to prove yourself wrong is the closest thing to certainty we can get. It's not easy. It demands humility, patience, and the courage to watch cherished ideas crumble. But every time you do it, you trade fragile certainty for durable wisdom, and that's a trade only the strongest thinkers are willing to make. Use boredom as a creativity incubator. Using boredom as a creativity incubator is the deliberate act of letting your mind go quiet and unstimulated so it can wander, connect ideas, and generate insights that constant activity drowns out. In a world addicted to distraction, boredom feels uncomfortable, even unbearable, but it is in that empty space that your brain shifts from reacting to creating. When you're bored, your mind enters what neuroscientists call the default mode network. This is when your brain stops processing immediate tasks and starts linking memories, emotions, and concepts in novel ways. It's why your best ideas often appear in the shower, on a walk, or while staring out a window. Without the noise of constant input, your subconscious finally has room to surface solutions and ideas that were brewing unnoticed. The problem is that most people never let themselves get bored anymore. Every gap in attention is instantly filled with scrolling, notifications, or background noise. As a result, the mental compost pile where creativity grows never has a chance to form. By resisting the urge to fill every silence, you give your brain the stillness it needs to start making unexpected connections. Deliberately cultivating boredom might mean leaving your phone at home during a walk, sitting in a cafe without opening your laptop, or spending a quiet hour with no agenda at all. The first minutes will itch with restlessness, but if you push through, your mind will start to roam, and that's where sparks ignite. Boredom isn't a void to escape. It's a fertile ground for breakthroughs. The silence you fear today might be the birthplace of the idea that changes everything tomorrow. Use the energy audit on commitments. The energy audit on commitments is the brutally honest self-check that reveals which parts of your life are fueling you and which are silently draining you dry. At its core, it's the practice of evaluating every responsibility, relationship, and routine through one lens. Does this give me energy, or does it take it away? Most people measure commitments in terms of time or money, but energy is the true currency of achievement. Without it, even the best plans collapse. The power of this audit lies in its clarity. You list every regular commitment in your life, projects, meetings, habits, social obligations, and ask, do I feel more alive after doing this, or more depleted? This forces you to confront hard truths you've been avoiding. Maybe that weekly meeting is killing your creativity. Maybe that friendship leaves you feeling small. Maybe that side project you've been clinging to out of guilt is stealing energy from the one that actually matters. Psychologically, this process works because your brain is terrible at noticing slow leaks. We normalize constant fatigue, forgetting that it's not normal to feel drained all the time. The audit brings those leaks into the light, and once you see them, you can either fix them, delegate them, or cut them entirely. When you start making decisions based on energy return, you stop living like a battery constantly running on low power. You begin filling your days with commitments that ignite you, not exhaust you. Over time, your life shifts from survival mode to high performance, not because you're doing more, but because you're protecting and multiplying the most precious resource you have, your energy. Do hardest task first. Eat that frog. Doing the hardest task first, often called eating the frog, is a productivity discipline that crushes procrastination and builds unstoppable momentum. The idea is simple. Every day, identify the task you're most likely to avoid, the one that feels heavy, uncomfortable, or intimidating, and tackle it before anything else. This works because willpower is highest in the morning, before decision fatigue and daily distractions drain your energy. If you wait, resistance grows, excuses multiply, and the task looms even larger in your mind. The frog is rarely just another item on your list. It's the thing that, once completed, will create the biggest shift in your progress. It's the difficult conversation, the key proposal, the workout you've been skipping, the decision you've been delaying. These are the tasks that matter most and move the needle fastest, which is exactly why your brain tries to push them to later. By doing it first, you take control of your day instead of letting the day control you. Once the frog is eaten, everything else feels lighter. You've already proven to yourself that you can handle discomfort, and that confidence fuels the rest of your actions. The ripple effect is huge. Stress drops, focus sharpens, and small tasks become easier because you're not carrying the weight of the big one anymore. High achievers use this method daily because they know the first victory sets the tone for everything that follows. If you start your day by conquering the hardest thing, the rest of the day feels like you've already won, and that momentum is priceless. Use premortems before projects. Using premortems before projects is the strategic art of imagining that your plan has already failed, and then working backward to figure out why. At its core, this technique flips the usual success-focused mindset and forces you to confront every possible pitfall before it happens. Instead of blindly charging ahead and hoping for the best, you simulate disaster in your mind, exposing weaknesses that would otherwise remain hidden until it's too late. Most people do postmortems only after things have gone wrong, dissecting the wreckage when the damage is already done. A pre-mortem gives you that same clarity up front when you still have the power to change the outcome. You gather your team or your own thoughts and ask, it's 6 months from now and this has completely failed. What happened? The answers are often uncomfortably honest. Timelines slipped, resources were underestimated, communication broke down, key assumptions proved false. This process works because it removes the blinders of optimism bias. When we start something, we naturally focus on best-case scenarios, which blinds us to obvious threats. By making failure the starting point, you bypass ego, pride, and wishful thinking, and open the door to ruthless, reality-based planning. Pre-mortems also boost confidence, not by pretending risk doesn't exist, but by making you ready for it. When you've already mapped out what could derail you, you can design countermeasures before the first step is even taken. The result is a plan that's not only stronger, but also less fragile under pressure. In a world where most people plan for perfection, the ones who prepare for collapse are the ones who actually finish strong. Protect your attention like gold. Protecting your attention like gold means treating your focus as the most valuable and limited resource you own, because it is. Time is finite, but attention is what determines the quality of that time. You can have hours in the day and still achieve nothing if your focus is fractured. In today's world, attention is under constant attack from every notification, every open tab, every demand screaming for instant response. The people who rise above the noise are the ones who guard their mental space as fiercely as their most precious possession. Every time you switch tasks, answer a ping, or glance at your phone, you pay an invisible cost. Your brain takes minutes to fully re-engage, and that cognitive leak robs you of deep work and creative flow. Over the course of a day, those leaks drain your mental energy until you're left with nothing but shallow scraps of focus. Protecting your attention starts with setting hard boundaries, turning off notifications, blocking distracting sites, and carving out sacred time for deep, uninterrupted work. It means learning to say no without apology and creating environments that make focus the default instead of the exception. The people who master this understand that attention is power. The more you can sustain it, the faster you learn, the deeper you think, and the more you create. They don't squander it on every trivial request or dopamine hit. They invest it in the tasks, relationships, and visions that truly matter. Your attention is the currency of achievement. Spend it carelessly, and you stay broke in every sense. Guard it like gold, and it compounds into a life of clarity, mastery, and impact. Use curiosity as a productivity trigger. Using curiosity as a productivity trigger is the mental hack that transforms work from something you have to force into something you can't resist. At its core, it's about tapping into the brain's natural hunger for exploration and novelty to pull you into action, especially on tasks you've been avoiding. Instead of relying on discipline alone, you use a question, a puzzle, or a gap in your understanding as the spark that gets you moving. The brain is wired to seek closure. When it encounters an unanswered question or an incomplete pattern, it becomes restless, craving resolution. This is why cliffhangers keep you watching shows late into the night, and why you can't stop reading a mystery until you know the ending. You can harness this same psychological pull for productivity by turning your tasks into curiosity hooks. If you dread starting a report, frame it as, what's the most surprising insight I could find in this data? If you need to research a market, ask, what's the hidden factor everyone else is missing? The moment your brain locks onto a question it wants to answer, the resistance fades and the work starts to pull you in. Curiosity also shifts your emotional state. Instead of feeling pressured or bored, you feel engaged and even playful. Work stops being a chore and starts feeling like a quest. And the more often you use curiosity to begin, the more your brain learns to associate, starting with intrigue instead of dread. When you master this, procrastination loses its grip because you're no longer pushing yourself to work. You're being pulled forward by the irresistible need to find out what happens next. Speak last in group settings. Speaking last in group settings is a subtle but powerful influence strategy that lets you gather more information, read the emotional landscape, and position your words for maximum impact. Most people rush to speak early, eager to share their thoughts, stake their claim, or prove their value. But speaking first means you reveal your hand before you've seen the cards on the table, and it robs you of the strategic advantage of listening. When you speak last, you get to observe not just what people say, but how they say it. You notice their tone, their hesitations, their confidence levels, their emotional investments. You watch alliances form, tensions rise, and unspoken fears surface. By the time it's your turn, you're no longer guessing. You know where the room stands, which arguments resonate, and where the gaps are. This allows you to tailor your words to address unspoken objections, unite differing opinions, or steer the group toward your desired outcome without resistance. This technique also carries psychological weight. The person who speaks last often has the final word ringing in everyone's ears, framing the conversation as it closes. It creates the impression of thoughtfulness and authority because you've clearly listened, processed, and spoken with intent rather than impulse. Leaders, negotiators, and skilled persuaders master this skill because silence is a weapon. It shows confidence, patience, and control. You're not fighting to be heard. You're choosing the perfect moment to speak so that when you do, your voice carries more weight than anyone else's in the room. Turn why me into what now. Turning why me into what now is the mental shift that takes you from powerless victim to decisive strategist in a single breath. At its core, this technique is about refusing to get trapped in the loop of self-pity and blame and instead redirecting all your energy toward action. Why me keeps you rooted in the past, obsessing over fairness and circumstance. What now snaps your focus to the present, where change can actually begin. When life blindsides you, loss, betrayal, failure, crisis, the instinct to ask, why me, is almost primal. It's an emotional cry for justice, an attempt to make sense of the pain. But here's the brutal truth. The universe doesn't owe you fairness, and searching for cosmic explanations only delays the moment you start moving forward. The longer you stay in why me, the deeper the quicksand of resentment and helplessness pulls you in. The power of what now is that it demands a response. It forces you to look for options, even if they're small at first. It shifts your identity from someone things happen to into someone who makes things happen next. That subtle change transforms your posture, your tone, and your choices. People who master this shift don't have fewer hardships. They simply refuse to stay stuck in the shock of them. They channel the raw energy of pain into movement, often discovering resilience and resourcefulness they never knew they had. Why me builds a cage. What now finds the door, kicks it open, and steps into whatever comes next. End the day with tomorrow's top 3 priorities. Ending the day with tomorrow's top 3 priorities is a mental clarity ritual that transforms how you start your mornings and how much you accomplish. Instead of waking up and wasting your freshest mental energy figuring out what to do, you begin the day already armed with a battle plan. This single habit removes decision fatigue, builds momentum instantly, and ensures you spend your time on what matters most instead of reacting to whatever screams loudest. Most people open their day in chaos, scrolling emails, checking messages, reacting to demands, letting other people's priorities hijack their focus. By the time they settle in, the most valuable hours of their brain power are gone. But when you decide the night before what your top 3 priorities will be, you anchor your day before it even begins. These aren't random tasks. They're the high-leverage actions that move your goals forward. Limiting it to 3 forces brutal clarity. If you can only choose 3, you're forced to identify the few moves that truly matter, not the dozens that just keep you busy. It's a safeguard against the seductive trap of productivity theater, where you look busy but achieve little. The magic happens in the morning, when you can dive straight into the first priority without wasting a drop of willpower on deciding where to start. The momentum from accomplishing even one of these before noon creates a ripple effect of confidence and focus for the rest of the day. This habit is a quiet form of power. You stop living in reaction and start living with intention. Each night, you're not just ending your day, you're setting tomorrow up to be unstoppable. Use perspective zoom out in stress. Perspective zoom out is the mental escape hatch that pulls you out of the suffocating grip of stress by expanding your view beyond the immediate crisis. When you're overwhelmed, your mind narrows its focus to the problem in front of you, magnifying it until it feels like the only thing that exists. Perspective zoom out deliberately reverses that tunnel vision, reminding you that what feels massive now is often just a moment in a much bigger picture. The technique is simple but powerful. You step outside your immediate emotions and imagine the problem from a higher vantage point. How will this matter in a year, in 5 years, in the scope of your entire life? You can even push further. View yourself as a character in history or from the perspective of someone on another planet. The wider the lens, the smaller the problem feels. This works because the brain's stress response is designed for survival, not perspective. It locks you into fight or flight mode, making the problem seem urgent and absolute. Zooming out tells your nervous system, this is not the end of the world, which lowers emotional intensity and frees mental bandwidth for rational thinking. Perspective zoom out doesn't erase the problem. It shrinks its emotional weight so you can face it with clarity instead of panic. From this vantage point, solutions you couldn't see before start to emerge. You regain the ability to act calmly, not react blindly. When you master this, stress stops feeling like a tidal wave that engulfs you. It becomes a ripple in a vast ocean, one you can navigate instead of drown in, because you remember you are far bigger than the moment you're in. Avoid binary thinking. Look for the third option. Avoiding binary thinking is the mental discipline of refusing to accept that your choices are limited to this or that, yes or no, win or lose. Binary thinking is seductive because it's simple. Our brains love clear black and white categories, but in reality, most situations live in shades of gray, and the most powerful solutions often appear only when you step outside the false trap of two extremes and search for the third option. When you see a choice as purely binary, you unknowingly shrink your creative capacity. Should I quit my job or stay miserable? Should I accept this deal or walk away? Should I tell the truth and hurt them or lie to protect them? In each case, there are often overlooked alternatives. Redesign the role, negotiate new terms, deliver truth with empathy. The third option is the realm of innovation. It's where breakthroughs live. This works because binary thinking activates your brain's fight or flight response, narrowing your perspective. Seeking the third option forces your mind to slow down, expand, and reframe the problem. Suddenly, you're not reacting, you're creating. You stop playing the game you've been handed and start designing a new one. Visionaries, entrepreneurs, and master negotiators excel at this. They refuse to accept either-or traps, instead asking, what's the solution no one's considered yet? This approach not only produces smarter outcomes, it makes you unpredictable in the best way. While others are stuck arguing over two fixed paths, you step onto a third one entirely, and that's where advantage lives. Practice mental subtraction to appreciate more. Practicing mental subtraction is the counterintuitive gratitude hack that makes you feel the value of what you have by imagining it's gone. At its core, this technique is about flipping the usual habit of wanting more and instead vividly picturing life without the people, possessions, abilities, and opportunities you currently take for granted. The effect is instant and visceral. Suddenly, what felt ordinary becomes precious. Our brains are wired for adaptation. The very things we once longed for, a stable job, a loving partner, good health, can fade into the background as we get used to them. This hedonic adaptation makes it dangerously easy to overlook our blessings until they're ripped away. Mental subtraction short-circuits that by creating a controlled absence, allowing you to feel the ache of loss without actually losing anything. The process is simple but powerful. Think of something or someone you value deeply, then imagine in rich detail that it's gone, the silence in the house without them, the emptiness of your daily routine without that job, the frustration of not having that skill you use every day. Let yourself feel it fully and then snap back to reality and notice that it's still here, still yours. This technique works because emotion is stronger than logic. You can list reasons to be grateful all day, but when you feel the pain of imagined loss, appreciation surges in a way words can't create. People who practice mental subtraction often report deeper happiness, stronger relationships, and a sharper awareness of their good fortune, not because they gained more, but because they finally realized how much they already have. Ask, compared to what? Often. Asking, compared to what, is a mental clarity weapon that slices through bias, emotional fog, and misleading narratives. It forces your brain to anchor every judgment, fear, or decision against a real alternative instead of letting vague impressions or exaggerated feelings dictate your choices. Without this question, you risk making decisions in a vacuum, reacting to surface-level data without understanding the full picture. Humans are wired to judge things in isolation. Something feels expensive, risky, or bad simply because we haven't stopped to compare it to anything else. A job offer might seem low until you measure it against your current pay and growth potential. A business risk might seem terrifying until you weigh it against the risk of doing nothing. Even failure feels devastating until you compare it to the regret of never trying. Compared to what? Strips away the emotional drama and forces you to see the trade-offs clearly. Every choice in life is a comparison, even if we pretend it's not. You're not just deciding to quit a job. You're choosing between your current situation and what could replace it. You're not just deciding whether to invest. You're deciding between putting money to work or letting inflation quietly eat it. This question also neutralizes manipulation. Politicians, marketers, and even friends often present information without a baseline, making something seem better or worse than it is. By asking, compared to what, you regain control of perspective, forcing the full context into view. The truth is, clarity doesn't come from looking at a choice. It comes from seeing the choice next to its alternatives, and that single question can turn an impulsive reaction into a calculated, confident decision. Reframe competition as collaboration. Reframing competition as collaboration is the mindset shift that turns rivals into allies and transforms the game from win-lose to win-win. Most people see competition as a battlefield. Resources are limited, success is scarce, and someone else's gain is your loss. That thinking breeds insecurity, defensiveness, and short-sighted moves. But when you choose to see competitors as potential collaborators, the dynamic changes entirely. You open the door to shared resources, mutual learning, and opportunities that pure rivalry could never create. At its core, this reframing works because it taps into one of the most powerful human instincts, connection. Even in competitive environments, people are drawn to those who respect their skills and see value in cooperation. By approaching a competitor with curiosity instead of hostility, you turn tension into dialogue. Maybe they have strengths you lack, and you have resources they need. Maybe together you can serve a bigger audience, tackle larger problems, or innovate faster than either of you could alone. Psychologically, collaboration also reduces the mental exhaustion of constant comparison. Instead of being locked in a cycle of one-upmanship, you shift to a mindset of shared growth. Every interaction becomes a chance to learn, exchange ideas, and strengthen your network rather than tear someone else down. The truth is, many of the world's biggest breakthroughs weren't the result of solitary genius. They were the product of unlikely alliances between people who could have been fierce competitors. When you stop guarding your turf and start exploring how you can build together, you stop playing a small game. You start creating something bigger than what either side could win alone. Use body language to shift mood. Using body language to shift your mood is the science-backed practice of changing your physiology to change your psychology. Most people think emotions dictate posture. If you feel confident, you stand tall. If you feel defeated, you slump. But it also works in reverse. Your brain reads your body's signals and adjusts your emotional state to match them. By deliberately adopting the posture, movement, and facial expressions of the mood you want, you can trick your brain into feeling it. This works because of the feedback loop between mind and body. When you sit up straight, lift your chin, roll your shoulders back, and breathe deeply, your nervous system interprets it as a sign of safety and strength. Your stress hormones drop, your voice steadies, and your thoughts sharpen. Smile, even if you don't feel like it, and your brain releases feel-good neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. Move with purpose, and your mind starts to believe you have purpose. Think about how athletes psych themselves up before a game. They don't wait to feel ready. They jump, stretch, pound their chest, or strike a power pose to become ready. You can do the same before a meeting, a difficult conversation, or any moment when you need confidence on demand. The beauty of this technique is that it works instantly. You don't have to wait for inspiration or motivation to strike. You create it. Change your stance, and you change your state. It's a reminder that your body isn't just a reflection of how you feel. It's a remote control for your mind. Practice intentional breathing. Practicing intentional breathing is the fastest way to take control of your body, mind, and emotions because it taps directly into the switchboard of your nervous system. At its core, this technique is about replacing unconscious, shallow breaths with deliberate, controlled breathing patterns that send powerful signals to your brain. You are safe, you are focused, you are in control. Most people breathe on autopilot, letting stress, posture, and distraction dictate their rhythm. Under pressure, breaths become short and rapid, feeding anxiety and tension. But intentional breathing flips this process, using slow, deep, purposeful breaths to calm the fight or flight response and activate the body's relaxation system. Within minutes, your heart rate steadies, your mind clears, and emotional turbulence begins to settle. This isn't just theory, it's biology. Your breath is one of the few functions controlled by both your conscious and subconscious mind. By taking charge of it, you can influence everything from blood pressure to mental focus. Techniques like box breathing, 4-7-8 breathing, or diaphragmatic breathing have been used by Navy SEALs, elite athletes, and monks alike to stay sharp under extreme pressure. Intentional breathing also anchors you to the present moment. It cuts through racing thoughts, pulling you out of past regrets and future worries into the immediacy of now. In high-stakes meetings before public speaking or in moments of personal conflict, even a single minute of focused breathing can transform how you respond. When you master your breath, you master the gateway to your state of being. Every inhale becomes fuel, every exhale becomes release, and in that simple rhythm, you rediscover a calm that nothing external can touch. Think like a scientist, not a preacher. Thinking like a scientist, not a preacher, is the discipline of seeking truth instead of defending belief. A preacher starts with a conclusion and hunts for evidence to justify it. A scientist starts with a question, tests reality, and is willing to be proven wrong. This shift in mindset is one of the most powerful ways to make better decisions, avoid blind spots, and grow faster than the people who cling to certainty. The danger of thinking like a preacher is that it locks you in intellectual armor. Once your identity is tied to an idea, your business strategy, your political stance, your self-image, you stop seeing clearly. You reject data that contradicts you. Surround yourself with people who agree and protect your beliefs like sacred relics. It feels safe, but it's a slow death for progress. Thinking like a scientist is different. You treat your ideas like experiments, testable, adjustable, and temporary. You're less concerned with being right than with getting it right. When evidence challenges you, you adapt instead of doubling down. This doesn't make you weak, it makes you unstoppable because you're constantly aligning with reality instead of defending illusions. This mindset demands humility, the courage to admit you might be wrong, and curiosity, the drive to discover what's true even if it disrupts your comfort. It also makes you dangerous in the best way. You can pivot faster, learn faster, and see patterns others miss because you're not blinded by ego. When you think like a scientist, every mistake becomes data, every failure becomes feedback, and every belief stays flexible enough to evolve. In a world where most are busy preaching, the scientist is the one quietly winning. Reward effort, not just results. Rewarding effort, not just results, is the mindset shift that builds resilience, fuels long-term growth, and protects you from the invisible poison of perfectionism. Most people only celebrate when they win, when they close the deal, hit the target, or achieve the milestone. But this creates a dangerous trap. You start linking your self-worth entirely to outcomes you can't always control. When results fall short, motivation collapses. Focusing on effort flips the script. Instead of asking, "Did I win?" you ask, "Did I show up fully?" This means you celebrate the training session even if you didn't set a personal record, the sales calls even if they didn't close, the writing session even if the chapter still needs work. You're reinforcing the behaviors that lead to success, not just the moments of success themselves. Psychologically, this approach is powerful because it keeps your brain hooked on the process rather than the prize. Dopamine, the brain's motivation chemical, is released not just when you achieve something, but when you anticipate progress. By rewarding effort, you create constant dopamine loops, which make you more likely to stick with hard, slow-building goals that others quit on. This also makes you more fearless. If only outcomes are rewarded, you avoid risks where failure is possible. But if effort is rewarded, you're free to try, experiment, and push limits without fear of losing your sense of value. Over time, this habit rewires your identity. You stop being someone who only feels good when they win, and you become someone who thrives because they know every step forward, no matter how small, is worth celebrating. And that's the kind of mindset that makes winning inevitable. Use constraints to fuel innovation. Using constraints to fuel innovation is the counterintuitive practice of turning limits into launch pads. Most people see constraints, lack of time, money, resources, or options, as obstacles that suffocate creativity. But history shows the opposite. Constraints, when embraced, force the mind to dig deeper, think sharper, and invent solutions that abundance would have never demanded. This works because the human brain loves efficiency but hates effort. When everything is available, we default to easy, predictable answers. But when the usual paths are blocked, our minds start forging new ones. That's why some of the greatest innovations were born in times of scarcity, when creators, entrepreneurs, and problem solvers had no choice but to work with what they had. Limited film budgets sparked creative camera tricks. Tight deadlines birthed some of the most iconic campaigns. Artists produced masterpieces with minimal tools. Constraints sharpen focus. They strip away distractions and force you to ask better questions. How can I achieve the same result without X? What's the simplest way to make this work? If I could only choose one feature, which one matters most? These questions lead to leaner, smarter, more impactful outcomes. Instead of fighting your limits, frame them as the boundaries of a game you're determined to win. Every limitation becomes a challenge to outthink, a puzzle to solve. And when you do, the solutions you create are often stronger, faster, and more original than if you'd had unlimited freedom. True innovation isn't born from having everything. It's born from having just enough to force genius. Recognize patterns in your thinking. Recognizing patterns in your thinking is the self-awareness skill that exposes the hidden scripts quietly steering your decisions, emotions, and behaviors. At its core, this technique is about stepping outside the constant stream of your thoughts to observe them from a distance, spotting the recurring loops, triggers, and biases that shape your reality without your permission. Once you see the pattern, you have the power to change it. Most people live inside their thoughts without ever questioning them. They mistake familiar mental habits for truth. I always mess this up. People can't be trusted. I'm not the type to succeed at that. These repeated storylines become invisible walls, trapping you in the same reactions and outcomes. But when you pause and notice, "I've thought this exact thing before," you start to see that it's not fate, it's a pattern, and patterns can be rewired. The process requires brutal honesty. You begin tracking when certain emotions spike, when procrastination strikes, when self-doubt whispers the same old lines. Over time, you spot connections. A critical email triggers the same defensiveness. A certain task always sparks avoidance. Specific praise always ignites overconfidence. The awareness alone is a shock, like seeing the strings of a puppet you didn't know you were. This is where change becomes possible. You can interrupt the cycle, insert new thoughts, or replace outdated mental scripts with empowering ones. Recognizing patterns isn't about controlling every thought. It's about refusing to be controlled by the ones that keep you stuck. And once you see the machinery of your mind, you're no longer just a passenger. You're the one holding the wheel. Rehearse future challenges in your mind. Rehearsing future challenges in your mind is the mental equivalent of a fire drill for your life. It's the deliberate act of visualizing high-pressure, high-stakes situations before they happen, so that when they do, you've already been there and know exactly how to respond. This isn't wishful thinking, it's stress inoculation, a way to train your mind and emotions to stay steady when others crumble. When something catches you off guard, your brain's survival wiring kicks in. Adrenaline spikes, rational thinking narrows, and you fall back on instinct, which for most people is panic or hesitation. But when you've mentally rehearsed the challenge beforehand, you've built a blueprint in your mind. You've already felt the pressure, heard the sounds, imagined the setbacks, and planned your moves. Your brain treats the real moment like a familiar path, reducing fear and sharpening focus. Athletes use this constantly, running entire plays in their heads until the muscle memory is automatic. Negotiators mentally practice tough conversations, anticipating objections and rehearsing responses. Surgeons visualize complex procedures step by step before making the first incision. The more vividly you rehearse sights, sounds, emotions, the stronger the effect. This technique doesn't just prepare you for success, it prepares you for failure and recovery. You can imagine things going wrong, then walk yourself through how you'll adapt and regain control. By the time reality arrives, you've already faced the worst and survived it, at least in your mind. When the challenge finally comes, you're not shocked, shaken, or scrambling. You're ready. You've been here before, and while everyone else is thinking, "What now?" you're already moving. Collect mental triggers that inspire action. Collecting mental triggers that inspire action is the practice of building a personal arsenal of thoughts, images, sounds, and cues that flip your brain from hesitation to movement in an instant. At its core, it's about knowing exactly what sparks your motivation and surrounding yourself with those triggers so that taking action becomes automatic, not a fight against resistance. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine. Certain stimuli, whether a song, a phrase, a smell, or even a single image, can instantly shift your emotional state. A single line from a movie can make you feel unstoppable. A specific song can push you to run faster. A photo from a moment you were proud can make you tackle something you've been putting off. By deliberately collecting these triggers, you're building a custom ignition system for your own drive. The key is to identify what genuinely fires you up, not what should motivate you, but what actually does. Maybe it's a highlight reel of athletes, a recording of your own goals read with conviction, a reminder of a time you overcame the impossible, or even a piece of music tied to a personal victory. Once identified, you place them where they can't be ignored, on your phone, your wall, your workspace, your playlists, so they're always within reach. The power of mental triggers is that they bypass overthinking. They don't negotiate with your excuses, they jolt you straight into action. When you've built a library of these cues, you don't have to wait for motivation to show up. You can summon it on command. And when action becomes a reflex, progress stops being a battle and starts being your natural state. Keep an anti-goals list. Keeping an anti-goals list is the deliberate act of defining exactly what you want to avoid in life, so you can design your choices around steering clear of it. While most people obsess over what they do want, wealth, success, freedom, they rarely take the time to define what they don't want. And yet, it's often the things we tolerate or stumble into by accident. Bad clients, toxic environments, draining commitments that quietly erode our happiness and performance. An anti-goals list is your personal warning system. It could include things like no more than 3 meetings a day, never work with people I don't trust, avoid projects that require weekend work, or no business travel longer than a week. These aren't about avoiding discomfort. They're about avoiding the specific patterns and traps you know will drag you away from your values, energy, and priorities. This works because clarity is a filter. When you know your anti-goals, decision-making becomes faster and cleaner. You stop chasing opportunities that glitter, but will eventually burn you out. You stop compromising on things you know will poison your momentum. You stop saying yes just because you can, and start protecting the space for things you should. High performers use anti-goals as guardrails. They don't just plan for success, they actively plan against failure. And here's the paradox. By obsessively defining what you refuse to allow into your life, you create more space for exactly what you want. The anti-goals list isn't about limitation, it's about liberation. It's the blueprint for a life that feels as good as it looks. Assume positive intent in others. Assuming positive intent in others is the conscious choice to believe that most people's actions, even when clumsy or hurtful, come from a place of misunderstanding, pressure, or their own struggles, not malice. It's not about being naive or ignoring bad behavior. It's about disarming your instinct to see enemies where there may be none. This shift changes the way you interpret the world, protects your emotional energy, and builds stronger relationships. When you assume negative intent, every delayed reply feels like rejection, every critique feels like an attack, and every disagreement becomes a battle. You carry constant tension, reading hostility into situations where none exists. But when you start with the belief that most people mean well, or at least aren't trying to harm you, you create space for patience, understanding, and better communication. This mindset diffuses conflicts before they escalate. Instead of reacting defensively, you become curious. Why did they say that? What might they be dealing with? Often you'll discover the offense was never about you at all. It was about their bad day, their own fears, or the information they had at the time. Assuming positive intent also shifts your presence in the room. People sense when they're being judged, and they open up more when they feel safe. Leaders who apply this principle inspire trust. Friends and partners who live by it deepen bonds instead of eroding them with suspicion. Yes, there are people who will exploit this goodwill, but they are fewer than you think. The risk is small compared to the peace, clarity, and strength that come from moving through life believing that, until proven otherwise, people are on your side. Train your attention with meditation. Training your attention with meditation is the mental gym workout that strengthens the single most valuable skill you have in the modern world, the ability to focus deeply on one thing without being hijacked by distraction. At its core, meditation isn't about emptying your mind. It's about learning to notice when your attention drifts and training yourself to bring it back over and over again. Every time you do that, you're building the neural muscles of concentration. In a world where notifications, noise, and constant mental clutter pull you in 100 directions, untrained attention is like a leaky bucket. No matter how much effort you pour in, your progress drains away. Meditation teaches you to seal those leaks. By sitting still, focusing on your breath, a sound, or a visual point, you start to notice just how often your mind wanders, and instead of judging yourself, you simply return to the focus point. That return is the rep, the mental push-up. Over time, this practice changes how you move through life. You become less reactive, less pulled by every distraction, and more able to choose where your mind goes. Conversations become sharper because you're truly listening. Work becomes more productive because you can lock in for hours without drifting. Even stress feels different because you're not drowning in it. You're aware of it and can decide what to do next. Meditation is the quiet forge where attention is tempered into steel. It's not about escaping life, it's about sharpening the blade of your mind so you can cut through the noise and focus on what actually matters. Whenever you choose, look for hidden upside in setbacks. Looking for hidden upside in setbacks is the mental art of turning pain into possibility. When life blindsides you, whether it's a failed project, a lost opportunity, or a personal disappointment, the instinctive reaction is frustration, self-blame, or despair. But hidden inside almost every setback is a seed of advantage, a lesson, or a redirection that you would have never uncovered without the failure. The key is training yourself to look for it before the wound has even closed. This works because the human brain tends to magnify losses and minimize gains. Setbacks feel like dead ends, but more often they're detours, routes that force you toward experiences, skills, or relationships you wouldn't have otherwise found. A lost client might push you to refine your offer and attract a better market. A rejected application might lead you to a role where your talents shine brighter. A breakup might reveal parts of yourself you'd neglected, setting the stage for a healthier future by asking, "Where's the advantage in this?" or "What might this be preparing me for?" You shift your brain out of victim mode and into opportunity mode. This doesn't mean sugarcoating pain. It means refusing to waste it. People who master this mindset don't bounce back. They bounce forward. Every setback becomes raw material for resilience, insight, and strength. And over time, you stop fearing the unexpected because you've learned that even the worst moments can contain a gift. The upside may be buried deep, but once you find it, the setback stops being a scar and starts becoming a stepping stone. Ask, what's the core assumption here? Asking, what's the core assumption here is the mental x-ray that cuts through noise, complexity, and half-truths to expose the single belief holding everything together. At its core, this technique is about refusing to take information, plans, or arguments at face value and instead digging down to uncover the hidden premise they depend on. Once you see that premise clearly, you can decide whether it's solid enough to stand on or flimsy enough to collapse the whole structure. Most ideas, strategies, and opinions are built on unspoken assumptions. These assumptions are rarely questioned because they're often invisible, buried beneath layers of logic and explanation. But if the core assumption is wrong, every conclusion that flows from it is fragile at best, disastrous at worst. Asking this question forces clarity. It's like pulling a single thread to see if the whole tapestry unravels. Imagine someone pitches you a business idea. We'll grow fast because the market is desperate for this product. That's the surface claim. The core assumption that the market is truly desperate. If that's wrong, everything else, marketing plans, hiring, investment, crumbles. By isolating this belief early, you can test it before pouring time and resources into a doomed path. This question also works on yourself. When you feel certain about a decision or belief, asking, what's the core assumption here, can reveal blind spots you didn't know you had. Sometimes the assumption holds and your confidence grows. Sometimes it doesn't, and you save yourself from a slow-motion disaster. Either way, the clarity it gives you is worth more than any comforting illusion. Think in decades, act in days. Thinking in decades and acting in days is the mindset of holding a vast, long-term vision while taking relentless, immediate action. It's the ability to zoom out far enough to see where you're going, yet zoom in close enough to make progress today. This balance creates the rare combination of patience and urgency that drives extraordinary results. When you only think short-term, you chase quick wins and shallow rewards, often at the expense of real growth. When you only think long-term, you risk getting stuck in planning mode, always preparing for the future but never moving in the present. The power comes when you merge the two, a vision so big it scares you, and daily actions so small and consistent they seem almost trivial. Thinking in decades frees you from the desperation that drives bad decisions. You stop panicking over temporary setbacks because you see them as bumps on a much longer road. A failed launch isn't a career-ending disaster. It's one experiment in a 10-year journey. This perspective protects your focus and keeps you grounded when emotions run high. Acting in days keeps you from drifting into complacency. You don't waste energy wishing for the future. You pull it closer with immediate, tangible moves. Every day becomes a brick laid toward your vision. One email sent, one page written, one conversation started. Over time, these tiny actions compound into something massive. The magic is in the tension. You're patient enough to play the long game, but urgent enough to never waste a day. Most people can do one or the other. The ones who do both change the game entirely. Use role switching to understand perspectives. Role switching to understand perspectives is the deliberate act of stepping out of your own viewpoint and into someone else's mental and emotional world. At its core, it's about momentarily becoming the other person, seeing through their eyes, feeling with their heart, and thinking with their priorities. This is not just empathy, it's strategic empathy, a skill that can dissolve conflict, strengthen influence, and reveal solutions you'd never find from your own angle. When tensions rise or negotiations stall, most people double down on their own position. They defend harder, argue louder, and blind themselves to anything outside their narrative. Role switching shatters that barrier. You ask yourself, if I were them, with their history, fears, incentives, and pressures, how would this situation look? What would I want? What would I fear losing? This mental shift forces you to let go of ego long enough to see the forces shaping their behavior. Psychologically, this works because humans are not purely logical. We are driven by emotion, identity, and unseen constraints. When you step into another's role, you uncover the hidden motivations behind their actions. You might realize they're not resisting you out of spite, they're protecting something they value. You might see a pathway where both sides can win, one you would have missed without their vantage point. This technique doesn't mean you agree with them or surrender your position. It means you gain the full map instead of fighting blind. And in any human interaction, the person who understands the most perspectives controls the most options. Role switching turns conversations from battles into collaborations because you're no longer speaking at someone, you're speaking from where they stand. Treat rest as a productivity tool. Treating rest as a productivity tool is the radical rejection of the hustle culture lie that rest is laziness. In reality, rest is the fuel that makes high performance possible. Your brain and body are not machines. They're biological systems that burn out when pushed beyond their limits. When you treat rest as optional, you're not showing dedication. You're sabotaging your long-term output. This works because recovery isn't separate from productivity. It's part of it. Sleep consolidates memories, strengthens problem-solving ability, and repairs the brain at a cellular level. Downtime restores emotional stability, sharpens focus, and replenishes creativity. Even short breaks during the day, stepping away from the desk, going for a walk, closing your eyes for 5 minutes, reset your cognitive resources so you can come back sharper than before. Athletes understand this instinctively. They schedule recovery with the same intensity as training because they know growth happens in the repair phase. The same principle applies to mental work. Deep rest after deep effort leads to deeper thinking and stronger results. When you treat rest as a tool, you start planning for it instead of fitting it in. You schedule sleep like a meeting, protect weekends like a deadline, and use micro breaks like investments in your performance. And the paradox is, by resting more strategically, you actually achieve more in less time, because every hour you work is fueled by full energy instead of running on fumes. Rest isn't the reward for hard work. It's the reason you can work hard, think clearly, and win over the long game. Keep a win journal. Keeping a win journal is the practice of deliberately recording your victories, big or small, so you have a growing archive of proof that you are capable, resilient, and making progress. At its core, this technique is about countering your brain's negativity bias, the built-in tendency to focus on mistakes and failures while letting successes fade into the background. A win journal forces you to hold on to the good, turning fleeting moments of achievement into permanent reminders of your strength. Most people underestimate their progress because they only measure it against their ultimate goals. They overlook the daily wins that quietly build towards something extraordinary. Finishing a tough workout, handling a difficult conversation well, sticking to a new habit for a week. Without acknowledgement, these moments vanish, and motivation with them. A win journal changes that by giving each victory a place to live and grow in your memory. The act of writing them down is more than a record. It's reinforcement. Every entry strengthens the mental association between your actions and positive outcomes, which builds confidence and momentum. On days when doubt creeps in, flipping through past entries can reignite the belief that you can figure things out because you already have. Over time, your win journal becomes more than a motivational tool. It becomes a blueprint of how you succeed. Patterns emerge. You start to see which actions and mindsets consistently lead to wins, allowing you to replicate them with intention. And in a world that's quick to remind you of your shortcomings, this private record of victories becomes your personal proof that you're moving forward, one win at a time. Limit input before creative work. Limiting input before creative work is the practice of protecting your mind from outside noise, so your ideas emerge untainted and original. It's about giving your brain space to generate rather than react, because the moment you flood it with other people's opinions, headlines, or creations, you start unconsciously shaping your work to match theirs. Inspiration is valuable, but too much input right before you create dilutes your own voice. The problem is that creativity thrives in stillness, and modern life offers none. Most people wake up and immediately check messages, scroll social media, or read the news. By the time they sit down to work, their minds are crammed with other people's thoughts, fears, and agendas. The result? Derivative ideas, diluted originality, and work that feels safe instead of alive. When you limit input, you step into creation with a mind that's fresh, unpolluted, and deeply connected to your own intuition. The blank space feels uncomfortable at first. It's easier to consume than to produce. But in that quiet discomfort, your brain starts reaching inward, digging deeper for connections and solutions. This doesn't mean cutting off inspiration entirely. It means creating a buffer. If you have creative work to do in the morning, resist checking your phone, email, or feeds until it's done. Let your mind wake up inside your own world, not someone else's. Your best work won't come from echoing what you've just consumed. It will come from the raw, unfiltered place that only emerges when you give it breathing room. Protect that space, and your ideas will have the power to surprise even you. Reframe criticism as free consulting. Reframing criticism as free consulting is the mental alchemy that turns what most people see as an attack into a hidden advantage. At its core, it's about stripping away the sting of someone's judgment and seeing it instead as valuable feedback you didn't have to pay for. Most people recoil from criticism, letting it bruise their ego or derail their confidence. But when you treat it like expert insight, no matter who it comes from, you gain access to perspectives that can sharpen your skills, strengthen your ideas, and accelerate your growth. The key is detachment. Instead of asking, "Why are they attacking me?" you ask, "What useful information can I extract from this?" Sometimes the delivery will be harsh, unkind, or even wrong, but hidden in the noise may be a clue you need. That offhand comment about your presentation style, it might be the spark that helps you communicate with twice the impact. That blunt critique of your strategy, it might reveal a blind spot you couldn't see from inside your own perspective. Psychologically, this shift works because it moves you from defense to curiosity. Defensive minds close. Curious minds open. You stop feeling like a victim and start acting like an investigator. Even if 90% of the criticism is useless, the 10% that's true can save you months of mistakes. When you master this, you stop fearing feedback. You welcome it because every critic becomes an unpaid consultant helping you refine your craft. And the more you seek it instead of avoid it, the faster you evolve, because you're not just reacting to the world, you're letting the world refine you into something sharper. Use chunking to remember more. Using chunking to remember more is the practice of grouping information into smaller, meaningful units so your brain can store and recall it more easily. The human mind struggles to hold endless, scattered details in short-term memory. Research suggests we can only manage about 7 items at a time. But when you break those details into structured clusters, you dramatically expand your capacity to remember. This works because your brain is a pattern recognition machine. It remembers shapes, sequences, and associations far better than raw, disconnected data. That's why a phone number is easier to recall when split into 3 segments rather than 10 separate digits. The same principle applies to learning a new language, memorizing a speech, or studying for an exam. You take the chaos and organize it into digestible pieces. Chunking doesn't just make memory easier, it makes recall faster. Instead of pulling each detail individually, you retrieve an entire chunk in one mental grab. For example, musicians don't remember every single note. They remember patterns of notes as a phrase. Chess masters don't memorize each piece's position. They remember configurations they've seen before. You can supercharge chunking by attaching meaning to each cluster. Group facts by theme, sequence events into a story, or link ideas with vivid imagery. The more structure and emotional relevance you give the chunks, the more your brain clings to them. With chunking, you stop cramming random details into your mind and start building organized mental folders. And when information lives in order instead of chaos, you can pull it out whenever you need, sharper, faster, and with far less effort. Ask, what's the leverage point? Asking, what's the leverage point is the mental habit of hunting for the single action, decision, or change that will create the greatest ripple effect with the least effort. At its core, this technique is about resisting the urge to attack problems head-on with brute force and instead looking for the precise spot where a small, well-placed push will trigger an outsized impact. Most people burn themselves out by throwing energy at symptoms rather than causes. They take on 10 low-impact actions instead of finding the one move that makes those 10 unnecessary. The leverage point question changes the game by forcing you to zoom out, map the system, and identify the hidden hinge that everything else swings on. In business, it might be automating a single bottleneck that speeds up an entire workflow. In relationships, it might be addressing one unspoken issue that's quietly poisoning trust. In personal growth, it might be fixing one key habit that cascades into dozens of improvements. This works because systems, whether in life, business, or human behavior, are interconnected. A change in the right place can create exponential results. while the same amount of effort in the wrong place barely moves the needle. The leverage point question keeps you from wasting time on low-yield actions by forcing you to find the highest yield one. When you train yourself to ask this every time you face a challenge, you stop fighting fires and start reshaping landscapes. You're no longer just working harder, you're working like a strategist, finding the point where one move changes everything. Use deliberate discomfort to grow. Using deliberate discomfort to grow is the intentional choice to step into situations that stretch, challenge, and unsettle you, because you know comfort is a cage and growth lives outside it. While most people spend their lives avoiding discomfort, those who seek it on purpose become stronger, sharper, and more adaptable than everyone else. Your mind and body are survival machines, programmed to keep you safe. But safe and comfortable are not the same. Comfort lulls you into stagnation. Discomfort forces adaptation. When you lift heavier weights, your muscles tear so they can rebuild stronger. When you speak in front of a crowd despite the fear, your confidence expands. When you tackle a skill you're bad at, your brain forms new neural connections. The discomfort is the training ground. It's where you build tolerance for uncertainty, pain, and failure, all inevitable parts of a meaningful life. Each time you choose it voluntarily, you expand your limits so that when discomfort chooses you, you're ready. Deliberate discomfort can be physical, cold showers, challenging workouts, fasting, or mental, like difficult conversations, public vulnerability, or entering spaces where you're the least experienced person in the room. The specifics matter less than the principle. Make struggle your ally. Most people think they'll grow first and then be ready for discomfort. The truth is, you grow because you enter discomfort before you feel ready. Every time you step into it on purpose, you send yourself the message, I can handle this. That belief compounds until you're no longer afraid of the unknown. You seek it out, knowing it's the doorway to your next level. Mentally simulate best and worst scenarios. Mentally simulating best and worst scenarios is the psychological safety drill that prepares you for the future with both confidence and resilience. At its core, it's about running vivid mental test drives of two extremes, the most successful outcome you can imagine and the most catastrophic failure that could realistically happen. This dual rehearsal transforms uncertainty from something paralyzing into something predictable and manageable. When you simulate the best-case scenario, you're not just daydreaming, you're priming your brain for success. You see yourself taking the exact steps, making the right moves, and feeling the emotional high of achieving your goal. This vision creates a mental blueprint your subconscious will naturally start steering you toward. It builds belief and sharpens the path forward. But the real power comes from pairing it with worst-case simulation. You deliberately imagine the obstacles, losses, and setbacks that could derail you, not to scare yourself, but to strip those fears of their power. Once you've seen the worst in your mind and prepared a plan to survive it, the fear shrinks. You replace, what if this goes wrong, with, if this goes wrong, here's what I'll do. That's the mindset of a strategist, not a victim. Psychologically, this works because your brain hates surprises. By mentally living through both extremes before they happen, you remove the element of shock. You're less likely to freeze under pressure and more likely to act decisively. When you make this a habit, you stop being at the mercy of the unknown. You've already played the game in your head. You know the moves, the risks, and the rewards. Now you're just stepping onto the field to execute. Celebrate micro-wins. Celebrating micro-wins is the practice of recognizing and rewarding even the smallest steps forward, turning progress into fuel for more progress. Most people postpone their sense of accomplishment until they hit massive milestones, finishing the book, landing the big client, reaching the six-figure income. The problem is that those big wins can take months or years, and without celebration along the way, motivation dries up. Micro wins keep the fire alive. This works because your brain thrives on dopamine, the chemical of reward and motivation. Every time you acknowledge a small victory, you give yourself a dopamine hit, reinforcing the habit that created it. This makes you more likely to keep going, even when the finish line is far away. It's the same psychology that makes video games addictive. They reward you constantly, not just at the end. A micro win could be sending one important email, finishing a tough workout, learning a new skill, or simply making it through a difficult day without quitting. By pausing to acknowledge it, whether with a smile, a journal note, a fist pump, or sharing the win with someone, you train your brain to associate effort with satisfaction. The beauty is that micro wins stack. What feels small in the moment compounds into major achievements over time. And because you've celebrated every step, the journey feels energizing instead of exhausting. High performers don't just celebrate when they cross the big finish line, they create dozens of finish lines along the way. They know that progress isn't made in giant leaps, but in tiny, consistent steps, and every single one is worth honoring. Use time boxing to protect deep work. Using time boxing to protect deep work is the act of carving out sacred, non-negotiable blocks of time where your most important, mentally demanding work gets done, without distraction, without multitasking, without compromise. At its core, this technique is about assigning a fixed box of time in your calendar for deep focus and treating it with the same seriousness as an urgent meeting or a flight you can't miss. Most people allow their best hours to be stolen by shallow work, emails, messages, errands, leaving their most important tasks to scraps of time and depleted energy. Time boxing flips that by making deep work the first thing that gets scheduled, not the last. You literally block it on your calendar. 9 on 11 a.m., deep work on strategy, or 2 on 3:30 p.m., writing chapter 3. No guessing, no squeezing it in when you have time. The time is the plan. This works because it creates a container for focus. When you know you have exactly 2 hours, the mind sharpens. Procrastination loses its grip because the window is finite. And by protecting it from interruptions, no phone, no meetings, no casual drop-ins, you enter the mental state where your best ideas emerge and your most complex problems get solved. Time boxing also builds rhythm. The more consistently you reserve these blocks, the more your brain learns to drop into deep focus on command. Over time, you create an environment where creativity and productivity aren't rare bursts, they're predictable outcomes. In a world addicted to distraction, time boxing isn't just a scheduling tool. It's a declaration that your best work matters enough to protect it fiercely. Practice gratitude before challenges. Practicing gratitude before challenges is the mental reset that turns fear into fuel and uncertainty into opportunity. At its core, this technique is about deliberately finding something to appreciate before you step into a difficult situation, anchoring yourself in a state of abundance rather than scarcity, strength rather than anxiety. It's not about pretending the challenge will be easy. It's about walking into it from a place of inner stability and perspective. Most people wait until after a hardship to look for the silver lining, but by then, the emotional storm has already hit. Gratitude before the challenge acts like an emotional shield. It keeps you from being consumed by the stress and primes your brain to see solutions faster. This works because gratitude triggers the release of dopamine and serotonin, chemicals that improve mood, sharpen focus, and calm the body's stress response. The practice can be simple but profound. Before a presentation, you might think, I'm grateful for the chance to share my ideas. Before a tough conversation, I'm grateful we care enough to talk honestly. Before a personal struggle, I'm grateful for the strength this will help me build. The gratitude doesn't erase the challenge, but it changes how you enter it, less as a victim bracing for impact, more as a participant ready to grow. When you approach challenges this way, you stop seeing them as threats to avoid and start viewing them as proving grounds. Gratitude becomes the lens that turns obstacles into stepping stones, and you step into the fight already feeling like you've gained something before it's even begun. Seek simplicity on the far side of complexity. Seeking simplicity on the far side of complexity is the pursuit of clarity after you've wrestled with the full weight of a problem's chaos. It's not about oversimplifying or ignoring the messy details. It's about walking through the mess, mastering it, and emerging with an elegant, distilled truth. Albert Einstein hinted at this when he said, "Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler." This works because real understanding isn't found at the shallow, obvious level. At first, things appear simple because you don't know enough to see the complexity. Then, as you dig deeper, the details multiply, contradictions emerge, and everything feels tangled. This is where most people get stuck, buried in the complexity, drowning in nuance. But if you keep going, if you map the patterns, connect the dots, and strip away the non-essential, you eventually find the deeper simplicity that can only be seen from the other side. This simplicity has power. It's the clear formula that drives a business, the core principle that unlocks a skill, the one sentence that explains an entire philosophy. It's what allows experts to teach with ease, innovators to design with elegance, and leaders to make decisions quickly without losing depth. The far side of complexity isn't reached by avoiding hard thinking. It's earned by embracing it. And once you get there, you hold an advantage. You can explain the complicated in a way that makes people feel like they've known it all along. That's when your ideas stop confusing people and start moving them.